Chapter 420. Ashias coughed a few times before continuing. About 24 miles east of Syracuse's camp is the city of Sirius. There are more hills in this direction, but the terrain is generally flat. That's why even though the Syracusans are operating in the camp today, their hired cavalry are in Sirius territory, destroying farms and orchards, burning down villages and houses. They even killed dozens of our scouts. How many soldiers are there in Syracuse's camp? Ascamas asked. According to our observations over the past 2 days, there are probably more than 50,000. Ascamas replied. 50,000. Ascamas thought for a moment, then turned to ask, Lord Felicius, how many enemies did you encounter in Corunna? No less than 40,000, Felicius answered honestly. If we include Medmar and Hyhernian's troops, the number of Syracuse's troops attacking our southern alliance should be more than. Ascamas spat out a number with a solemn expression. 100,000. Everyone's expression turned solemn when they heard this number. This is the largest army that has ever appeared in the history of Greece, the Western Mediterranean, and the entire Greek world. And our allied forces here, if we include the Trine militia, only have about 60,000 soldiers. Parthenis sighed. It's a pity that Lygum is separated in the south and can't meet up with us. Corunna is now under siege. Most importantly, Parthenis looked at Felicius and Ansatanos and said regretfully, Lord Devers is leading Dionia's main forces in Lucania municipality. If they were all gathered in Silatina, we wouldn't have to fear Syracuse at all, even if they have 100,000 soldiers. We've oversimplified things before. When we make plans, we always think too much on the bright side. Only when we put it into practice did we realize that there are so many problems. Ansatanos was blaming Dionia, but he was also trying to extricate himself from the discussion. Some things happened so suddenly that they caught us off guard. For example, the invasion of the Simonians was unexpected. I can only say that Dionysius has been preparing for this invasion for a long time. Ansatanos' words were obviously trying to boost his opponent's prestige and diminish his own morale. Ascamas snorted softly and was about to speak. Asopias quickly asked, When will Lord Devers return with his army? I haven't received any news yet. However, Master Devers has never suffered many military defeat. I believe that he will soon defeat the barbaric Simonians and come to join us, Ansatanos comforted. Felicius took the opportunity to continue the conversation. So, we should reinforce our camp outside of West Ritter City and form a corner with the city. We will stand on the defensive and delay Syracuse's army until Lord Devers returns with his army. Then, we will fight the people of Syracuse. Ascamas sneered. Listen to this, Lord Devers, Lord Devers. Without Devers, do you think that all the generals of the Southern Alliance can't command the war? Felicius' expression changed slightly when he heard this. Ansatanos furrowed his brows. Asopias, on the other hand, looked unhappy. Ascamas looked at Felicius with disdain. Let me ask you, how many days will it take to get from Thurii to Potentia? About 5 to 6 days by the shortest route, Felicius answered truthfully even though he was angry at what Asopias had just said. In other words, according to the days, it is possible that the Devers have just arrived at Potentia. Then how many days will it take to get from Potentia to here? About 9 to 10 days. 10 days. This does not include the number of days needed to defeat the Samni. The Crotone have never fought with the Samni before, but since they are natives living in the mountains, their fighting style is very likely to be similar to the Brudi. They rarely fight head-on in the mountains, and like wolves, they like to hide and ambush. This means that it is very difficult to defeat them in a decisive battle. It is impossible to end the war quickly. General Felicius, I know that there are many Brudi in your army. You should know this better than I do. Ascamas's tone became even more sarcastic. Even if the Devers are very good at commanding, being able to return to Silatina within 20 days, this is the shortest time I can give you, But in these 20 days, do you think that the 40,000 enemies that fought with you before will be able to take Coruña? I heard that the people of Syracuse have a siege weapon called the ballista. In the previous war with Carthage, they used it to take down a few of Carthage's cities. Felicius's expression changed again. After defeating the attacking troops of Syracuse, they had seized Syracuse's ballista. According to the captain of the ballista, it was very similar to the ballista of Dionia. Although the angle and accuracy of the ballista was not as good as Dionia's, it was much more powerful. After all, its size was larger than the ballista of Dionia, and the stone bullets it used were naturally larger. Thinking of Fenris, who was full of confidence when he left, Felicius's heart was in turmoil, and he could only remain silent. Escamas saw it and continued, "If the mixed army of Syracuse and Rockley uses the ballista to take down Coruña, and then rush to Silatina to meet up, they only need to send a small portion of their forces to besiege Trine. We will not be able to stop them at all. Then, how many days can Trine resist?" Asopias's face instantly turned pale. "By the time Lord Devers arrives with his army, I'm afraid that even the outskirts of Silatina will be in ruins." Escamas's next words made Prytanes and Asepias restless. After Prytanes and Asepias looked at each other and came to an agreement, Asepias slammed the wooden table and stood up, saying loudly, "My lords, we cannot wait any longer. We should take advantage of the fact that the two armies of Syracuse have yet to meet up and attack the army of Syracuse." Felicius frowned and asked, "Attack? How? Are we going to attack the main camp of Syracuse?" A letter of challenge. According to the soldiers who retreated from the Coerta River, they saw a huge flag of Syracuse behind the army of Syracuse crossing the river. The tyrant of Syracuse, that Dionysius, should be in this army. We will follow the ancient tradition of sending him a letter of challenge, inviting him to a battle between our two armies. This tyrannical and arrogant dictator calls himself the master of Sicily. He probably won't allow himself to show fear in front of his subordinates and not dare to accept the challenge. Then, the people of Greece under his tyrannical rule will see through his cowardice and weakness. Asepias said with uncertainty, "That's a good idea. We of Trine will also do our best to send more soldiers to meet up with you. This way, the number of soldiers of our allied army will greatly exceed the number of soldiers of Syracuse here." At this moment, Asopias also took the initiative to promise. But if Dionysius's military strength is inferior, he might very well refuse to accept the challenge, Felicius cautiously reminded. If Syracuse doesn't dare to accept the challenge, then we will attack their camp. Escamas took over and added, "I've observed the camp of the Syracusans. The camp they built is far from the sturdiness of your Dionia's camp. Don't your troops also have ballistae? Then, we will keep throwing rocks at Syracuse's camp until the cowardly Syracuse soldiers are forced to accept the challenge." As a neighbor of Dionia, Crotone paid close attention to the Dionysian army. "That's right, Lord Escamas. Let's do that." Asepias replied excitedly. "Lord Felicius, what do you think?" Prytanes' question caused everyone to focus their attention on Felicius. Facing everyone's expectant gaze, Felicius felt like he was sitting on pins and needles, but he could not give an answer. Seeing that everyone was getting impatient, Ansitanos stood up and said, "My lords, please allow me to have a word with Lord Felicius alone." The two of them left the hall. Ansitanos swept the dust off the steps, sat down, and invited Felicius to take a seat as well. Felicius was a little overwhelmed by the favor. He had been in a high position in the Dionia alliance for several years, but facing a grand scholar like Ansitanos alone, Felix, who was once a mercenary, couldn't help but feel a sense of inferiority in his heart. Lord Felicius. Ansitanos did not notice his expression. He looked at the plaza in front of him and asked in a calm tone, "Are you going to stick to the defensive strategy that Lord Devers came up with?" Felicius hesitated for a moment before answering, "Yes." The battle plan of Escamas and Aceshes is too risky. If it fails, the consequences will be unimaginable. As long as we hold on to the camp and wait for Lord Devers to lead the army back to Greece, we will fight the people of Syracuse. Whether it is the number of soldiers, ability, or the commanding ability of the generals, we will be able to defeat the people of Syracuse. This is the safest strategy. The safest strategy? I'm afraid that the people in the room don't think so. Ansitanos sighed. When danger comes, humans will always think of eliminating the danger as soon as possible and will not calm down to think of a long-term plan. Now that the flames of war have spread to the land of the Alliance, their homeland is facing great danger. Our delaying strategy will only make them feel suspicious and angry. They will think that we, the people of Dionia, are selfish, allowing their homeland to be invaded and their people to be killed without doing anything. If this continues, the image that Dionia has been working hard to build in the Southern Alliance will be destroyed. We will lose the trust of the people of these cities, which will be detrimental to the future development of Dionia. Are we going to put our soldiers in danger just to win their trust? Felicius retorted. Chapter 421. Felicius did not say a word. In his heart, he more or less felt that there was a chance of victory by forcing Syracuse, who only had half of their military strength, to engage in a battle here. The reason he did not agree was because he had been following the will of the Devers for a long time. Ansitanos thought for a moment and slowly said, "According to my understanding of Lord Devers, even if he feels that there is a high chance of failure here, he will still take the initiative to fight this battle." "Why?" Felicius asked hurriedly. Ansitanos looked at the Silitinian citizens who were gathering in the distant square with weapons in their hands, and said in a low voice, "Because victory can win the respect of the Greeks, and defeat can also win the hearts of the Greeks. But in a situation like this, where everyone is looking forward to it, if we do nothing, it will only cause the Alliance to turn its back on us. We can take back the lost land, but if we lose the hearts of the people, it will be much more difficult to regain it. But if we lose this battle, Corunna, Trine, and even Silitinian may be in danger." Felicius was still hesitant. "Didn't Lord Devers already make arrangements? What are you still worried about?" Ansitanos looked into the distance with a faint smile. Perhaps the Devers have already expected this day. Since the people in the room dare to make such a decision, then they must bear the price of failure. After saying that, Ansitanos stood up, patted the dust off his body, and no longer looked at the Silitinian citizens in the city. He sighed softly, and said something that Felicius did not quite understand. "This is like burning the barren land to open up new land. Only by burning the weeds and trees can it be suitable to start sowing new seeds. Sigh, this is politics." The two of them returned to the meeting, and Felicius agreed to the proposal of engaging in a battle with Syracuse, but he made a request. The command of the entire battle belonged to Dionia. Pretinus, Aceshes, and Asopius had no objections. Only Escamas disagreed. However, be it the number of soldiers or performance, Dionia's 4th and 5th legions were far superior to Crotone's troops, which had just joined the battle. Therefore, Felicius was ultimately chosen as the commander of the Southern Alliance. When Felicius returned to the camp, Dracos and Epicthenes were already waiting for him in the tent. "Felicius, what's the final decision?" Epicthenes asked impatiently. "Our allied army is preparing to force Syracuse to engage in a decisive battle," Felicius said honestly. "Yeah, I guessed right." Epicthenes looked at Dracos excitedly. "I didn't make that bet with you, because I chose to fight against Syracuse as well." Dracos ignored him and turned to ask Felicius, "Who will command this battle? Do you even need to ask? It will be none other than us." Epicthenes blurted out. "I will command the allied army," Felicius said with a heavy tone. He could feel the pressure on his shoulders. At the same time, he saw the excitement on the faces of the 2 legion of Dionia. He also realized that both the commanders and the soldiers of the 4th and 5th legions were probably eager to fight against Syracuse. Their morale was high because of their achievements, the victory of the defense of the camp, and the hospitality of the Kyrenians. At the same time, the pride and honor of the soldiers of the Legion of Dionia would not allow them to retreat for long. Of course, if the Devers were here, no one would dare to disobey. However, he could not guarantee that he would be the commander. With that in mind, he felt relieved. He waved at the two and said, "Let's plan how we can win this battle." When Epicthenes heard this, he stopped joking and asked seriously, "Which city-states are participating in the war? How many are there? How many people from Syracuse might join the battle?" "Aside from our 17,000 legionnaires, Crotone also has 17,000 legionnaires, 6,000 of which are heavy infantrymen. The Silatorians currently have 14,000 legionnaires, 3,000 of which are heavy infantrymen. They still want to recruit more citizens. Trenna has 7,000 legionnaires, but they have to defend their city, so they can only send 4,000 to 5,000 legionnaires and 1,000 heavy infantrymen. In total, they have 54,000 legionnaires and 22,000 legionnaires." When Felicius finished, Epicthenes whistled. "Wow, that's a huge army." "Not many." Dracos poured cold water on him. "All of Dionia's legionnaires and reserve soldiers combined can easily surpass this number, and the number of heavy infantry far exceeds this allied army. Each legion of Dionia has 6 heavy infantry battalions, and excluding the reserve soldiers, the entire legion has 30,000 heavy infantry. A full set of heavy infantry equipment was expensive, and many civilians were unwilling or unable to afford it. However, many Dionians who had just become probationary citizens and official citizens were willing to spend all their money to purchase such equipment. That was because serving in the Dionian Alliance's military service as heavy infantry would bring them more benefits, such as obtaining land, taking up public office, participating in local council elections, participating in elections for civil officials, and so on. Moreover, the Christoia Bank, which was unique to Dionia and could provide low-interest loans in all cities, also gave the new citizens the confidence to buy heavy infantry equipment. "But not all of our legionnaires are here. Only my Legio 4 and your 5th Legion are here." Although Epicthenes was refuting Dracos, his expression was one of excitement. "It's up to us to decide the outcome of this battle." Dracos did not say anything, but his eyes were also shining brightly. "Commanders, according to the intelligence from Sirius, we have to face at least 50,000 soldiers of Syracuse. They were able to defeat Carthage, so I'm afraid they won't be easy to deal with." Felicius reminded them solemnly. "This battle is of great importance. If we fail, Syracuse's army may approach Dionia's territory, and the other cities in the Southern Alliance may also be conquered. The consequences will be unimaginable. I'm also an elder of Dionia. Of course I understand the importance of this battle." Epicthenes grumbled to express his dissatisfaction at Felicius's belittling of him. He then asked, "Are you sure there are only 50,000 of them? What about the 40,000 that attacked us in Corunna?" "They're besieging Corunna. The scouts from Sirius have been keeping a close eye on the situation there and reporting back to the allied army." Felicius obviously knew what they were worried about. To prevent them from suddenly splitting up and heading north, and to strengthen Syracuse's forces in the Sirius camp. As long as Syracuse doesn't increase their forces, we have a good chance of winning. Epicthenes looked at Felicius, then at Dracos. He analyzed, "We've already fought against Syracuse. Their cavalry is very strong, but no matter how strong they are, they won't dare to charge into a dense square formation. As long as we're on guard, even if they defeat our cavalry, they won't have much of an advantage. If they dare to approach our formation, our light infantry will deal them a heavy blow." Felicius and Dracos nodded. Dracos took over and said loudly, "As for Syracuse's infantry, I believe that since they could defeat Carthage's men, they shouldn't be weak. However, from the battle in Corunna, their morale and fighting spirit don't seem to be very strong. In terms of heavy infantry, Syracuse's army definitely can't compare to our legion. The other two immediately agreed. This wasn't because they were proud, but because the Devers' advanced battle concepts had taught them. The Legion of Dionysia was actually a complex mixed army that could adapt to various situations and execute complex tactics after going through rigorous training. This was why Felicius, Dracos, and Epthenis were so confident. Our legion is very different from the other allied armies, be it in terms of tactics, training, or equipment. It's not suitable for us to fight together with other troops. It's easy to cause chaos, which is not good for our legion, Dracos reminded. Dracos is right. I suggest that we gather the 4th and 5th legions together instead of separating them. This way we can form a strong fighting force. Either side of the formation will be a huge threat to the enemy. After defeating the enemy in front, we can surround the middle and finally win the battle. Epthenis gestured on the wooden table and voiced his opinion. I think so too. Although the two legion commanders didn't usually get along well, they reached an agreement when it came to battles. Felicius put his hands behind his back and took a few steps in the tent. He turned to look at the two and said awkwardly, I agree with your suggestion, but this isn't a battle that Dionysia is facing alone. There are Trine, Cirium, and Crotone's allies. But you're the commander of the entire allied army. Epthenis said anxiously, You have the right to make the most reasonable arrangement. We think it's reasonable, but they have to think it's reasonable too. Only when everyone has reached an agreement can the entire battle plan be carried out smoothly, Felicius said helplessly. It's not that easy to be the commander of the allied army. Chapter 422. They all admit that the Legion of Dionysia is strong, but because of that, they hope that we can guard the middle and link the two flanks. That way they can attack with confidence. Felicius looked at the two and said honestly, Although I had the same idea as you before, I'm worried that the middle and the other flanks of the Trine, Siltine and Crotone armies won't be defeated before we defeat the enemy in front of us. If they are defeated, the whole situation may become chaotic, and the cavalry of Syracuse will have a chance to show their strength. On the other hand, if we guard the middle, we can control the rhythm of our attacks and defenses, discover gaps in the flanks at any time, and send reinforcements in time. That way, it will become a battle of defense and attrition between us and the people of Syracuse. I'm afraid the battle will last for a long time. Epitenes, who used to be a light shield soldier, did not like this way of fighting. A battle of defense and endurance. Isn't that what our heavy infantry is best at? Dracos, on the other hand, was full of confidence. Even if the legion is stationed in the middle, I believe we can still penetrate the enemy's middle. Since you've already made a battle plan in the meeting, why are you still asking for our opinion? Just give us the order and let us carry it out. Epitenes' voice was filled with resentment. That's just a rough preliminary plan, Felicius said honestly and passionately. I need your experience and wisdom to perfect this battle plan so that we can obtain more chances of victory. This is for Dionia. Epitenes and Dracos looked at each other, then leaned towards Felicius. After 2 days of hard work, the Samni Hilpini had expanded their camp and surrounded Potentia tightly, except for the south, where there was the Bacento River. The great leader of the Hilpini, Villani, had only sent his men to build a few simple watchtowers on the other side of the river to observe the movements in the city. With the pontoon bridge burnt down, he was not worried that the people of Potentia would cross the river and escape. If the people of Potentia abandoned the fortified city and chose to cross the river to escape, that would be exactly what he wanted. However, in the river that Verani imagined could stop the people of Potentia from escaping, there were people swimming in the dark. Half an hour later, Chief Vale, who was in charge of defending the city, arrived at the great leader's mansion. It was impossible for Poimet to sleep peacefully. When he heard that Veil was here, he thought that the people of Potentia were up to something again outside the city. He immediately received Veil in the living room, and then listened to the leader's excited report. The envoy of Dionia requests an audience. Printos, the captain of the Dionia Mountain Brigade, greets the great leader Pwamet. When the drenched Printos bowed to Pwamet, the great leader asked anxiously, "Lord Devers is in Poseidonia. How is it?" This morning, Sir Devers led the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Legions to annihilate Samani's reinforcements and defenders. Printos answered straightforwardly. "Great. That's great." Pwamet was so excited that he could not control himself. He asked eagerly, "Will Sir Devers lead the army to Potentia tomorrow?" Printos did not answer directly. Instead, he took out a small waterproof leather tube from his neck and took out a paper scroll from it. "This is a letter that Sir Devers asked me to pass to you, great leader." Pwamet hurriedly took it and opened it. Then, his expression turned serious. "Quick, call Borit over." Borit, who had been staying in the backyard all day, was anxious when he heard the news that the Dionia army had defeated the Samani in Poseidonia. When he saw the secret letter from the Devers, his reaction was different from Pwamet's. He was already eager. "Sir Devers asked us to cooperate with your mountain reconnaissance team to disrupt the enemy's camp tonight in order to coordinate with the arrival of the army tomorrow." Printos, on the other hand, looked calm. His eyes were bright as he said, "Before going up the mountain, I specially observed the Samani camp. The continuous fleeing soldiers made the camp quite chaotic. Half of my brothers pretended to be fleeing soldiers and mixed in. Now I have a better idea." The Hilpini people had prepared everything needed to attack the city. They were only waiting for the reinforcements from Poseidonia to return. Then they would attack together and clean up the fish in the net of Potentia. That night, Veroni slept peacefully early. "Father! Father!" Gurney suddenly burst into the big tent and woke him up. "What happened?" Veroni opened his eyes and looked at his son, who was standing in front of him in a daze. Then, he heard him say in a panic, "Something big happened. The reinforcements we sent to Poseidonia were annihilated by the Dionia." "What?" Veroni's sleepiness was all gone. "How is this possible? We've sent more than 20,000 Pentni and Kautini warriors. Torek and Quainduk are all very experienced generals. Unless... He thought of a possibility, and his breathing suddenly became rapid. "Dionia's reinforcements from Tulii have already arrived at Poseidonia, but they've been lying in ambush." Gurney told his father everything he heard from the soldiers who had escaped back to Poseidonia. After listening to his son, Veroni suddenly felt his limbs go cold. He sat back on his bed, his mind a mess. After a while, he suddenly raised his head and asked, "Have Torek and Quinduk escaped? I heard that Torek died in battle, and there's no news about Quinduk." Gurney looked depressed. Veroni felt a sense of sorrow, but this was not the time to be sad. He immediately asked, "How many soldiers did Pentni and Kautini escape? How can we count in the dark? Anyway, there are soldiers escaping into the camp from several directions." Gurney finished his words and asked anxiously, "Father, what should we do now?" The bad news came too suddenly, and Veroni's mind was in a mess. How could he think of a solution? Just as he lowered his head and pondered, there was a commotion outside the big tent. The noise was getting louder and clearer in the dark. "The reinforcements we sent to Poseidonia have been defeated. The reinforcements from Dionia are here. There are at least 50,000 to 60,000 of them. We're going to be surrounded. Run, brothers of Hilpini." "Oh no!" Veroni jumped up in shock and rushed out of the tent. He saw that the camp, which should have been quiet at night, was now in an uproar. The soldiers did not know what to do. One by one, they came out of their tents naked and began to follow the others, screaming and running around in panic. Veroni saw people everywhere in the camp. This was the first time the Simonians had organized such a large army, and it was the first time they had fought such a long war, counting from the time they gathered their troops. So Veroni had never experienced such a chaotic scene before. Of course, he did not know what a camp howl was, but he instinctively felt the danger and immediately criticized Gurney. When these defeated soldiers returned, you should have separated them to avoid affecting the morale of our soldiers. Now, go back to your tribe and maintain order in your tribe. Tell the soldiers to stay in their tents and do not come out. Gurney left in a hurry. Veroni hurriedly summoned his guards with torches to inform Lescock, Lucaini and other chiefs, ordering them to do their best to restrain the troops. Only then did Veroni realize that the camp had not been well planned. The distance between the tribes was relatively far, and the tents were too densely set up. The passages between them were narrow and crooked. It was fine during the day, but it could easily cause blockages at night. He could only guard outside the big tent, surrounded by hundreds of guards, hoping that the tribal chiefs could play a role. When the commotion in the camp subsided a little, he would send his guards back to the camp to maintain order. He suspected that there were enemies in the camp who were taking the opportunity to cause trouble. At this time, outside the bustling Simonian camp, under the hill where Potentia city was located, Borat was quietly hiding with 1,000 soldiers. Can we attack now? Borat looked at the Simonian camp close at hand. He could not help but ask Printos anxiously in a low voice. The captain of the Mountain Ridge Reconnaissance Brigade, the executor who had once seized Aspulistum, was unusually calm at this moment. He said in a low voice, "Wait a little longer." Wait. Wait for what? If it were not for the fact that the speaker was a Dionia officer with a secret order from the Devers, Borat would have already taken action. Printos did not seem to hear the urgency and annoyance in Borat's words. He kept looking at the camp in front and said softly, "Wait for the fire." Veroni stood in the big tent and saw that the dark camp had been lit up with torches. It seemed that the tribal chiefs had begun to take action. But after observing for a while, he found that the situation was not well contained. At night, the strong mountain wind whistled. Not only did it not cover up the noise in the camp, but it also made him feel cold. When he wanted to return to the big tent and put on the wolf-skin robe, an even louder noise came from the camp again. Fire! Fire! Chapter 423. Quick! Go get Jern and put out the fire immediately. Veran hurriedly asked the guards to inform his son. As soon as the guards left, he realized that he was too anxious. He hurriedly asked the captain of the guards beside him to immediately put out the fire. Great leader, what about your safety? The captain of the guards was in a difficult position. The camp was not peaceful tonight. If they left, who would protect the great leader? There's no food, the whole army is in danger. What's the use of my safety? Veran stomped his feet anxiously. The guards could only rush to the place where the fire started. However, there were more than 25,000 people in the camp. The camp stretched for 7 to 8 miles. There were people everywhere in the camp, and the roads were congested. Not only did the guards move slowly, but their eagerness to move forward angered the panicked soldiers and caused a fight. The conflict was gradually expanding. It was early winter, and the air was dry. In addition, the Dionia scouts who sneaked into the camp deliberately set the fire. The fire spread quickly with the help of the wind, burning the entire supply camp. It continued to spread in all directions, setting the surrounding wooden fences and tents on fire. Veran looked at the fire behind him, and his heart sank to the bottom of his heart. It's over! It's over! He sat on the cold ground with a blank expression. However, this night was destined to be his nightmare. Woo! Suddenly, the sound of a bugle horn resounded from all around the camp, followed by countless people's shouts and cries for blood. The people of Potentia could not enter the enemy's camp silently like the legion of Dionysia. However, Pote's courage and persuasion made Pomote finally make up his mind and send out 5,000 soldiers. They divided into 5 groups and quietly went down the mountain, hiding in various places outside the Samani camp. As soon as he saw the fire, Borlet could not wait to have his men blow the horn. Then, horns sounded from other places. The warriors of Potentia, with a vengeful rage, bypassed the antlers, climbed over the ditches, climbed over the mud walls and wooden fences. At this time, the Samani camp was already in a state of panic. Now that the fire had attracted the attention of the people outside the camp, the defense around the camp was lax, allowing the warriors of Potentia to enter the camp relatively easily. As a result, all of them turned into bloodthirsty wolves, slashing at the silhouettes they saw and stabbing at the sounds they heard. The sounds of fighting and screams echoed throughout the camp. This made the frightened Sam-Monet people even more frightened. In the dark night, for their own safety, all of them held their weapons tightly. As long as someone approached, they would stab and slash. The camp was in chaos. In such a chaotic situation, the Dionia scouts who had infiltrated the camp earlier shouted in the Samanese language that they had learned, "The Dionia army is here. They want to annihilate us, run." The fear in the night was magnified infinitely, finally crushing the fighting spirit of the Sam-Monet warriors. Like a flood, they desperately ran out of the camp. For this reason, they who had lost their minds could push down their companions, cut down their comrades who stood in their way, and trample on their tribesmen who were moaning on the ground. The dark night became their accomplice in killing each other. Poimet, who had been worried about the war all night, stood on the city wall and watched. He heard the noise in the Samani camp, saw the fire that illuminated half of the sky in the distance, and heard the earth-shattering screams of fighting and killing. This scene lasted until late at night, and then gradually disappeared. The scouts who went to the foot of the mountain to gather news came back and shouted excitedly, "The enemy has been beaten back! The enemy has been beaten back!" Suddenly, the whole city became a sea of joy. Poimet was relieved. The only thing he was worried about was the fire that was burning more and more fiercely. However, because the situation was unclear at night, he did not dare to send people to put out the fire. Unexpectedly, even the gods were looking after Potentia that night. In the second half of the night it actually rained. Poimet was completely relieved. Finally, he slept all the way until the sky brightened under the constant drowsiness. He hurried to the city wall. Along the way, he saw that the tribesmen who were originally lifeless had smiles on their faces. They gathered in 2s and 3s, excitedly talking about the war last night and thanking Asanu for his protection. From time to time, someone would ask Poimet, "When can we move back to our original settlement?" Poimet stood on top of the city wall and looked down. The Samani camp, which once stretched for 10 miles and had countless tents, had basically turned into a piece of black land. Wisps of green smoke lingered in the area, making it hard for Poimet to see clearly. Did Borlet and the others come back? Poimet asked the tribal chief, Veil, with concern. They didn't come back, but he sent someone back and said, "They have to clean up the battlefield and will return later." "It's good that Borlet is fine," Poimet thought happily. What Borlet said about cleaning up the battlefield was not that simple. Looking closer at the Samani camp, under the ashes of the burning fire and in the mud caused by the heavy rain, bodies of both sides were lying everywhere. Some were already dead, some were even burnt black, some were seriously injured and unconscious, and some were still struggling and moaning. Last night, the Potentia warriors led by Bruti had suffered heavy losses in the chaotic battle due to their lack of night attack experience, with nearly 2,000 casualties. After the fierce battle, they ignored their fatigue and called more people from the city to carry the wounded and corpses back to the city. At the same time, they began to clean up the battlefield in the ruins within a 10-mile radius. They stabbed the Samani who were still struggling a few times to confirm their death. At the same time, they also had to find their own tribesmen who were mixed in the enemy's corpses. This search process was dangerous for the Potentia warriors. Some of the Samani warriors who were not seriously injured would disguise themselves as corpses and attack when they got close. After so many such ambushes, the potential warriors became more cautious. They held spears in their hands. When they saw a corpse, as long as it was not one of their own, they would stab it a few times. Such a large area could not be cleaned up in a short time. Behind these warriors, the Dionia scouts were carefully counting the number of casualties of the Samni according to the divided areas. In the afternoon, the cleaning work came to an end. There were 5,493 Samni deaths. There were no injured, because even if they survived the chaos last night, the angry potential warriors would mercilessly kill them when they cleaned up the battlefield. The rest of the Samni people fled in all directions, scattered around the area around Potentia. When the Samni people invaded, they cleaned up the area around the city of Potentia. Now, the hungry Samni people had to swallow the bitter fruit of their own making. How to escape the pursuit of the Potentia people, endure the hunger and injuries, and safely return to their hometown had become a big problem for them. The people of Potentia paid a lot of sacrifices. With the full help of the people of Dionia, they finally defeated the powerful Samni people. After surviving the disaster, they were overjoyed. They did not know that they had buried a big surprise in the huge Samni corpse pit. The great leader of Hilpini, the commander of the Samni coalition army's invasion of Potentia, Villani, had sent his personal guards to maintain order and put out the fire last night. In the end, Paulet led his army to attack the camp. The Samni people panicked and fell into chaos. Villani, who was alone and a little old, died in the chaos in the early morning of this day. In the Temple of Hades in Turin, the Silentlander Cardias woke up early as usual and walked into the main hall of the temple. He entered the side of hell. After staying here for a long time, the horrible scenes of hell and the ferocious statues of the god Hades had no effect on him. He respectfully held an oil lamp and came to the seat of Pluto Hades. The oil basin in front of the statue was lit with a greenish-red flame all year round. The stern and solemn face of the god Hades looked even more gloomy under the flickering light. Cardia's expression was calm. He stood on his tiptoes and lit the oil lamp in his hand. Then, he knelt in front of the statue of Hades. He closed his eyes slightly and spread his palms on the ground. He sincerely prayed to Pluto, hoping that he could protect the safety of the Silentlanders. When he heard that the people of Syracuse had landed in Rockley, he was eager to return to Silentland. In the end, he was persuaded by Pleasonus. Pleasonus told him that even if he returned to Silentland, he would only be adding an ordinary public militia to the city. But here, he could pray to this powerful king of hell day and night in order to obtain this god's help. Cardias thought that the chief priest was right, so he continued to stay in Turin. At this moment, he placed the oil lamp that represented his wish on the altar table. Because it was still early and the temple had not opened, there was only one lamp on the altar table. But at night, the table and the floor were filled with oil lamp. Every time, they would clean up very late. Cardias, you are so sincere. I believe that the Hades will definitely respond to you. A voice came from behind him. Cardias hurriedly turned around and saluted. Good morning, Pleasonus. The Temple of Hades was now basically common in the cities of Dionia. There were priests, saintesses, believers. There were many people in charge of the management of the temple, and there were differences in status among them. But when it came to addressing each other, the canon of Hades stipulated that one could only address each other by their real names, to show the concept of equality of believers in the Temple of Hades. Chapter 424. But Silatina is outside the protection of Hades. Cardias looked slightly gloomy. This is the mission you will have to undertake in the future. The reason why Plazinas looked at Cardias, who came from a foreign country, differently was that he was the key figure in the development of the unique Temple of Hades in Dionia. But now let us pray together. Let Hades bless Lord Devers to defeat the Simonians as soon as possible, return to Thurii, and then go to Corunia to repel the Syracuse, and ensure the peace of Greece. You are right, Cardias looked up at the statue of Hades, and the faith in his heart became firmer. I must let the power and kindness of Hades shine on the city of Silatina. When Cardias left the temple, Plesinas swept away the solemnity from before and turned back quickly to close the temple door. He was the only one left in the temple. He knelt respectfully in front of the statue and sincerely repented, "Lord Hades, forgive me for what I have done. This is for your descendants. It's also to give you even greater glory." After saying this silently, Plesinas raised his head and felt that the face of the statue did not seem so terrible, so he began to make arrangements. Although the people of Dionia were not as afraid of war as other Greeks, the two battlefields, one in the south and one in the north, were not only large in scale, but also far away from them. Of course, they were also worried about the safety of their loved ones. The number of people who went to the temple of Hades to pray and ask for blessings every day had more than doubled than usual. But from this day onwards, some people claimed that when they put an oil lamp on the altar table, they saw the words, "Worship my blood as king, protect the peace of the alliance," appear on the table, but it soon disappeared. There were also people who said that they also saw this line of writing, but not on the altar table, but on the pillars in the temple. There were also people who said that when they prayed, they heard the statue make a low roar, and it seemed to be shouting Devers. At first, this was just a sporadic rumor, and the people of Dionia only regarded it as a joke. But as time passed, more and more people said that they had witnessed this magical phenomenon, and things developed rapidly in one direction. On the same morning, Dionysius received the emissary from the Southern Alliance in his tent. When he saw the letter of challenge handed over by the envoy, he was secretly delighted. As it turned out, Dionysius did not try to take down Carunia as Pratines and Ascamas had speculated. Dionysius was far from being as arrogant as the Greeks thought he was. On the contrary, he was very shrewd. Although he had never fought on the land of Greece before, from what Locke had told him and what he had seen with his own eyes, he believed that Carunia, a city that had been besieged by Locke many times, would not be easy to capture. With his rich experience in sieging cities, he knew that once he put his troops into the siege, it would definitely take a lot of time, and time was very precious to him and the army of Syracuse. He had to break the stalemate as soon as possible and seize the chance of victory on the battlefield of Greece. Therefore, after careful consideration and discussion with Phoebidas, he once again used the trick of crossing the sea by deception that he had used to defeat Himilco outside the city of Syracuse. He sent a messenger back to Locke and ordered 20,000 freedmen who had followed the army ashore and were responsible for transporting supplies, equipment, and food, then disguised as soldiers, quietly rushed to the camp of the allied army of Syracuse and Locke that was besieging Carunia last night, and replaced the 20,000 soldiers of Syracuse. The people of Carunia were besieged in the city, and the scouts of the Southern Alliance could not play a role at night. The 4th and 5th legions of Dionia had just arrived at Silatina, and the generals were busy discussing. The soldiers were in a hurry to build the camp and had not sent out any scouts to investigate the situation. On the second day, the Tin-Fall coalition army's numbers remained the same, and they continued to attack Carunia city with ballista cannons. Then, they began to cut down trees and build siege towers. Surprisingly, the southern Italian coalition army did not notice anything unusual. At this time, the army of Syracuse had returned to Locke, and under the leadership of General Phasipizas, they passed through the mountain pass and quietly reached the west coast, then quickly marched north. Only General Phedon of Lygum, who was stationed in Taurina, noticed the movement of the enemy. However, at this time, both the land and sea routes of Lygum and Taurina were under the control of Syracuse, and their communication with the Southern Alliance had been cut off. Phedon did not know that the 4th and 5th legions of Dionia had retreated. In a hurry, he had to take the risk and select a dozen daredevil soldiers, hoping that they could pass through the mountain pass and reach Carunia to report this important information to the Allied army. This was to prevent Syracuse from suddenly increasing their forces and breaking through the defense line of the Ramato River. Phaedon thought that Syracuse was still blocked south of the Ramato River, so he increased their forces. In fact, Dionysius had secretly swapped out these 20,000 soldiers and rushed them to the Euphemia plains. Not only did it increase his military strength in this area to nearly 80,000, which was an absolute advantage in terms of numbers, but these were also the troops that he usually led, so it was quite convenient to command them. His original target was Trine. Although this city was not big, it was located in the Euphemian plains. Due to the constant attacks from the north by the Briti, it had never been able to expand. However, there was a large river to the south, and it was far from Locke, so when the Locke alliance invaded, they mostly attacked from the side of Carunia. On the other hand, the British invasions were mainly based on looting. Lacking siege technology, they rarely attacked Trine. Therefore, the Trine people did not crazily thicken the city walls and widen the moat like the Carunians. Therefore, the city of Trine, with its low population and low walls, and its location on the plains, became a fat piece of meat in Dionia's eyes. Her initial plan with Phoebidas and the rest was, after Phasapeses led his army to Hyhernion, he would take 20,000 men from the main camp to attack Trine. When the southern Italian coalition army saw that he had divided his forces, if they led their army to rescue him, Dionia would secretly let the Phasapeses' army reach Trine via the sea route. From there, they would use their advantage in numbers to defeat the reinforcements. This way, Syracuse's army would have complete control over the area and continue their pursuit to the north. If the southern reinforcements did not come to rescue them, this option was less likely because it would cause dissension between the southern Italian coalition army. Syracuse's army would seize the opportunity to take down the city of Trine, weaken the enemy's forces, and then continue to press on the southern Italian coalition army. After reading the letter of challenge sent by the Solidian emissary, Dionysius laughed heartily in his heart. Now, these arrogant Greeks actually want to fight with me. Do they really think that they can defeat me with just the few of them? This is the perfect opportunity for me to wipe them out in one fell swoop. Dionysius was proud in his heart, but he showed a hesitant expression on his face. He didn't reply for a long time. The emissary of the allied forces said impatiently, "Tyrant of Syracuse, I heard that every time you execute the citizens of your city, you are very decisive. Not even a drop of tear has been shed. Why are you afraid when facing the army of the Greeks that you plan to enslave today? If you only have this little bit of courage, you'd better scram back to that small island on the other side of the strait and rule it. Otherwise, the wrath of the Greeks will swallow you and your army whole." Facing the emissary's mockery, Dionysius's eyes widened in anger and his face turned red. He picked up a pen angrily and wrote on the tactics, "Battle tomorrow morning." Then, he threw it at the emissary and shouted, "Since you Greeks want to die early, then pray to Hades today. That way, you will suffer less pain when you go to Inferno tomorrow." It's still unknown who will win and who will lose. Moreover, the death-loving Hades is the protector of Dionia, the most important ally of the Southern Alliance. The emissary picked up the letter of challenge and didn't forget to refute. "What's your name?" Dionysius looked at him fiercely. "Silesius, the son of Scolas, the Silotonian," the emissary answered with his head held high. "Silesius, I'll remember you." Dionysius spat out his name in a sinister manner, his words carrying a hint of threat. Silesius was not afraid at all. Instead, he laughed contemptuously. "It's my honor to be remembered by the tyrannical dictator of Sicily." After the emissary left, the anger on Dionysius's face immediately disappeared. He paced back and forth in the big tent excitedly, then waved to the guards and said, "Go, call that Sparta man to me." Seeing Phoebidas quickly walk into the big tent, Dionysius immediately said, "Just now, the Silotonian sent an emissary to me to issue a letter of challenge." Seeing his happy face, Phoebidas asked directly, "So you agreed?" "I didn't agree immediately. I wanted the emissary to think that I was hesitating and afraid. Dionysius was obviously quite satisfied with his performance just now and said proudly, "Actually, there's no need to fight with the Southern Alliance." Phoebidas immediately poured cold water on him. "If we attack Trine, we can mobilize the Southern Alliance and defeat them with superior military strength without understanding the military situation and without sufficient preparation. If it's a battle, a face-to-face battle, it will increase the casualties of your soldiers." Chapter 425. Phoebidas stopped talking. Dionysius's arrogance made him, a warrior from Sparta, the overlord of Greece, uncomfortable. "Phoebidas, for this upcoming battle of the largest scale in Greek history, I need the help of Sparta's best warrior to make it easier for us to win this battle." Phoebidas could not refuse Dionysius's invitation. Just the phrase, "the largest battle in Greek history," alone was enough to attract his greatest enthusiasm. On the same day, the Devers asked Legio III's 1st Brigade, Lazaru, to lead 3 heavy infantry brigades, a total of 3,000 soldiers, and 1,000 soldiers from Elea to garrison Poseidonia. At the same time, they would guard the nearly 10,000 captives. For this reason, the Devers also sent fast horses to Picassus and informed Antares to arrange for men to escort these captives to the rear of Lucania. Then, he led the 1st, 2nd, and Legio III's soldiers, a total of about 24,000 soldiers, and marched east along the Seal Valley. The march was not smooth. Not only was the road difficult, but they also encountered the Samni from time to time. At first, when they received the report from the scouts, the Devers thought that the Samni wanted to use the complex terrain of the mountains to harass the army, so they sent out the light infantry and light armored soldiers of the 3 legions to guard the 2 flanks of the marching army. Unexpectedly, when the soldiers rushed forward, they found that the enemy's resistance was weak, and they were easily captured. The first thing the captured Samni people did was to open their mouths and ask for food. They called the soldiers who could understand the Samni language. After asking them, they found out why they were there and immediately reported it to the Devers. Only then did the Devers know that the Samni army outside Potentia had been defeated because of the night attack. This was a huge surprise. Originally, the Devers only asked Izam to send a lot of mountain scouts to disguise as the Samni defeated soldiers. They planned to sneak into the Samni camp at night, spread rumors, and shake the morale of the army. Of course, if it was possible to burn the Samni's supply, then the following battle with the Samni would be considered a sure win. For this reason, he wrote a secret letter to Potentia, hoping to get some help. Of course, this was just a casual move. He did not have high hopes that it would succeed. He did not expect the Samni to be defeated just like that. This made the Devers, who had a clearer understanding of the history of the Samni were the strong enemies of the early Rome in his previous life, a little shocked. But soon, the army met the scouts who rushed back from Potentia to report the news. The Devers confirmed that the Samni had been defeated, and they also learned that the captain of the scouts, Printos, played an important role in the operation last night. He was the one who planned the night attack and took the initiative to contact Pollet in Potentia. After listening to the story of the night attack, the Devers could not help but praise the captain of the scouts. "Lizam, you have a very good subordinate." Lizam said seriously, "He is better than me. When the country is in danger, it is time for heroes to emerge." The Devers were filled with emotion, and at the same time, he remembered the name Printos in his heart. Looking at the Samni who were so hungry that they could not even walk, they thought about how they had been through a night of chaos and shock. Their camp was burned down, and they were washed away by the rain. They were tired, hungry, and shocked. They did not have any fighting strength left. The battle in Potentia was basically over. The Devers made this judgment and instantly felt a lot more relaxed. He immediately ordered the light armor and light infantry of the legion to attack the Samni decisively if they encountered them. At the same time, he sent people to Potentia quickly, and asked Plomoth to prepare a camp for the army in advance. Usually, when marching in the war zone, the Legion of Dionysia would stop in the afternoon and start to build a camp. But today, the Devers had to march boldly and strive to reach Potentia within a day. In the evening, the vanguard arrived at the outskirts of the city of Potentia. They were surprised to see that under the dim sky, 2 fire dragons stretched parallel to the west mountain pass from the city of Potentia. They were at least 2 miles long. Those were the people of Potentia holding up torches to welcome the Dionysian army and to light the way for the troops. After the Devers knew the situation, they immediately rushed to the front, and just happened to meet Plomoth and a group of tribe leaders. "Honorable Lord Devers, all the people of Potentia warmly welcome you and your army." Under Borit's instructions, Plomoth respectfully saluted the Devers, and the leaders behind him followed suit. The Devers did not sit still on their horses and accept the salute of their allies. Instead, they hurriedly jumped off their horses and quickly returned the salute. With a slightly apologetic and emotional tone, they said, "It is really my fault for leading the army to disturb your peace so late at night. I did not expect you to disregard your own safety and welcome us in such a warm way, even though the territory of Potentia is not yet safe. I am really— Thank you. On behalf of all the soldiers, I express my heartfelt gratitude to the people of Potentia and all the leaders." "No, Lord Devers. It should be us, the people of Potentia, expressing our gratitude to the soldiers of Dionia." Plomoth felt that the Devers could understand his painstaking efforts and felt that their hard work was not in vain, but he did not show it. Instead, he said emotionally, "Compared to the great kindness of Dionia in saving Potentia, this little thing we have done is nothing." "We are allies," the Devers said with a gentle smile. "Allies should help each other like brothers." That's right. That's right." Plomoth nodded. He wanted to say more, but Borit, who was beside him, interrupted, "Lord Devers, will we affect the soldiers' advance by talking here?" The Devers was reminded. He looked back and saw that the army had stopped advancing. He quickly said, "Leaders, I am so sorry. Please come with me." "Oh, it was our negligence." Plomoth hurriedly led the people to make way for the army. "Tormid." The Devers turned around and shouted, "Sir, pass the order. Let the drummers and trumpeters play the victory march. Celebrate this moment of victory with our allies." The Devers said loudly, "Understood." Tormid immediately turned around and left. The Legion of Dionysia paid great attention to the smoothness of military orders. They strictly used bugles and drums to convey orders. Therefore, there were only a few dozen trumpeters and drummers. There were 2.5 legions here, with a total of 24,000 soldiers. There were more than 100 drummers and trumpeters. After receiving Tormid's order, they retreated to the side of the road. As members of the Legion who did not participate in combat, they did not only have the task of conveying military orders in battle. During the march, in order to lift the spirits of the soldiers and forget their fatigue, they would play music to help the troops march. For this reason, during the Alliance's military training, other than practicing with the soldiers during phalanx training, they would gather alone to practice playing music at other times. Of course, they would be present in the various large-scale celebrations of the Alliance. Therefore, even though they did not directly participate in combat, they were still respected. At this time, some of the trumpeters changed to the bamboo flutes at their waists, while some of the drummers changed to small copper pipe. Everyone performed their duties and began to play music. The Victory March was a march that Divers was familiar with from his previous life. He hummed it and asked the musicians of the Alliance to compose and adapt it. Although it did not have the varied melody and grandeur of the symphony from his previous life, it was still a rare piece of music in this era. In the quiet night, when the lively and cheerful but rhythmic melody was played, it quickly resounded in the sky above Potentia. When the people of Potentia heard it, they felt relaxed. During this period of time, The sadness of losing their loved ones and the worry of the destruction of their homes seemed to be temporarily put aside. They could enjoy the joy of defeating a strong enemy and obtaining victory. And the tired soldiers of Dionia lifted their spirits, straightened their chests, and welcomed the inspection of the people of the Alliance with their best spirit. Legion advance. At the forefront of the marching formation were the 300 personal guards of the Devers, led by the substitute Captain Rodham. Marcius was recovering in Turii. He raised the military flag representing the supreme commander of the Devers with both hands. At the top of the flag was a golden statue of Hades wearing a crown, sitting steadily on a throne, holding a double fork in one hand and a ball in the other. Compared to the gloomy and ferocious statue of Hades on top of the military flag, this one showed the dignity of a king. The black flag under the statue was embroidered with the name, Devers, with golden silk thread. Behind the guards was the flag-bearer of the First Legion. However, he was not followed by heavy infantry, but by light infantry and light armor. This was because on the mountain road, once they encountered an enemy, the fast-moving light armor and light infantry could quickly respond. In fact, most of the Samanai people captured on the road were due to them. After the First Legion was the supply team, then the Second Legion, and hundreds of Samanai people captured on the way. Then came the Legio III, and finally some light infantry, light armor, and cavalry. The reason why the cavalry was arranged at the end was that part of the mountain road could not be ridden. They had to lead the horses and walk. Moreover, the mountain road was narrow. If thousands of horses picked up their feces and urine, it would seriously affect the marching speed of the troops behind. The light infantry was mixed to prevent the Samanai people from attacking the rear. Chapter 426. Pwammet looked at the rows of Legion of Dionysia soldiers walking past him with their heads held high. He could not help but exclaim, "What a powerful army! Dionia has so many brave soldiers. Who would dare to invade us? No wonder the Samanai were no match for you, Sir Devers." Great leader Pwammet, the Samanai army was defeated by the brave warriors led by the leaders of Potentia, said the Devers humbly. Sir Devers, if you had not led your army to annihilate the reinforcements sent by the Samanai to Poseidonia, made a detailed plan, sent your soldiers to infiltrate the enemy's camp, disturb the enemy, and even sent your men to contact us and persuade us to carry out a night attack, we would not have had the ability to defeat so many fierce Samanai soldiers by ourselves. Borat said bluntly, "There's no need for you and me to give in to each other. To be able to achieve such a victory and restore peace to this land is the result of the unity and cooperation of Dionia and Potentia." The Devers concluded, "Yes, thank God Asanu. Potentia is glad to have joined the Dionia alliance. Without the full support of Dionia, Potentia would not be where it is today. The people of Potentia will always remember this kindness." Pwammet exclaimed from the bottom of his heart. The other leaders also expressed their gratitude to the Devers one after another. "Lord Divers, we've prepared a campsite for your army. It's near the city of Potentia. It used to be the settlement of one of our tribes. Due to the lack of time, we did not have enough time to clean it up. Some of the houses were destroyed by the Samanai," said Borat. After following the Dionysian army for so many days, he knew what the Devers needed the most at this time. "Thank you so much. This has solved our big problem." The Devers was overjoyed. "It's okay if the campsite is a little old, but we can borrow these torches for a while. Lord Devers, we have prepared a welcome banquet for you and your soldiers to celebrate the arrival of victory. Once you have set up camp, our people will carry hundreds of cattle, sheep, and wine to your campsite," Pomort said loudly, seeing that the atmosphere was good. However, he was interrupted by the Devers. "Great leader Pomort, and other leaders, I thank you for your kind invitation and your friendship to Dionia, but I heard that the invasion of the Samanai this time caused great losses to you. Villages and farmlands were burned down, many people were slaughtered or captured, and a large number of livestock were lost. Now your food supply is a little tight, and you still reward us with food. Do you think we can eat it? Devers's passionate words hit the soft spot of the potential leaders. They didn't say anything and only looked at their big leader. Pomort said anxiously, Lord Devers, although it is a little difficult for us, the Devers interrupted him again and said seriously, Great leader, our Dionia military law stipulates that during the war, the army is not allowed to drink, entertain, or celebrate. When I was in Elia, I received the news that the army of Syracuse had just invaded Greece. So the war here is over, and the war in the south has just begun. We still have to rush back to Thurii to drive away the enemy in Sicily. On the day of victory, Dionia will hold a victory parade. At that time, Dionia will grandly invite you and all the leaders to Thurii to celebrate this hard-won victory. At this point, the potential leaders couldn't persuade him anymore. Moreover, this was in line with many people's medical practice. Pomort, who had never traveled far, even promised, I will definitely go. In addition, after we took over the city of Poseidonia, we seized a large amount of food that the people of Syracuse gave to the Samni people. Since the people of Potentia are having a hard time making a living now, I have decided to transfer this batch of resources to Potentia so that this land can be revived as soon as possible, Devers said solemnly. Everyone present was stunned. How can this be? Pomort, who had always been calm and steady, was incoherent and did not know what to say. Lord Devers, those are your spoils of war. Besides, such a large army like yours also needs food, Borit quickly said. It's settled then, Devers said firmly. Merciful Lord Devers. Thank you, Lord Devers. I thank you on behalf of the people of the Liam tribe. The leaders rushed to express their gratitude. This time, it was completely sincere. Devers smiled without saying a word. In fact, as Borit had said, his army of 30,000 was also in a tight situation. The soldiers' rations had already been finished. The food had been transported from the Grimentum by land and sea. Just the transportation alone would consume a third of the food. It would be good if they could sustain the army for 10 days in Potentia. Although the battle here had ended, there was still follow-up work to be done. Even so, he did not hesitate to donate an astonishing amount of resources to Potentia. It was not for the present but for the future. At this moment, the atmosphere was more harmonious. Devers and the leaders were chatting happily in the mountains not far from them. Pairs of eyes filled with hatred were watching the grand and lively scene below the mountain. Chief, have you really decided to attack the camp tonight? There are probably tens of thousands of people in Dionia, and we only have 1,000 people. Most of our people are still hungry. Why don't we wait for the great chief and Chief Lescock to meet up before attacking the enemy? It's not too late. The subordinate warrior looked hesitant. It'll be too late by then. Only when the Dionia army has just arrived here and they're overtired, the chance of success in attacking the camp will be greater. Potentia can, cough cough. If they can do it, so can we. Gurney encouraged his people in a low voice, but he could not stop coughing. The experience last night was like a nightmare. If it was not for the night attack, he would not even mention the word Potentia. Besides, we've been searching for a day today, but we haven't met my father or Lescock and the others. At this point, he looked slightly worried and depressed, but he quickly threw away these thoughts that troubled him and encouraged his people again. We must take action immediately. Otherwise, the army of Dionia may attack Copsa from the north tomorrow. We must do our best to defend Abenelum and the neighboring lands. Yes. The Samanese warriors answered weakly. Late at night, Poimet returned to his house, still excited from the previous conversation. Borit, what do you think of the Devers? An amazing Greek leader. An amazing commander. Borlet's words were concise and to the point. So, do you think he can lead the Dionia army to repel the army of Syracuse? Poimet continued to ask. Borit hesitated, then said with certainty, I've never seen the army of Syracuse, but the Legion of Dionysia is the most disciplined and powerful Greek army I've ever seen. I believe they can win." "I believe so too." When Plomet finished, he saw his brother's surprised face and smiled. "Although I've never participated in a battle, the Devers are the best Greek generals I've ever seen at restraining their desires and controlling their subordinates' desires. Such a person's character is like a pine tree growing in a rock. He will never yield in the face of setbacks, and he will definitely win in the end." So, Plomet took a few steps and came to the statue of Asenath. After a devout prayer, he made his final decision. "I've decided to sacrifice Poseidonia to Dionia." "What?" Borat was shocked when he heard that. "In fact, Poseidonia is now in the hands of the Dionia. They took it from the Samani. Just now, the Devers didn't mention how to deal with the city, so it's better to give it to Dionia. Anyway, the people there are either killed or captured. We can't save them, so we'll leave it to the Dionia." Plomet sighed, his eyes becoming brighter. "I think the Devers are broad-minded people. The Buruti have surrendered, southern Lucania has surrendered, and many Greek city-states have surrendered as well. The Simonians have also been defeated. This land will be ruled by the Dionians in the future. We must make a decision as soon as possible so that the Dionians will not mistreat us, Potentia." "I understand, brother. You're the great leader of Potentia. You have the final say, and I'll listen to you," Borat said sincerely. "No, I'm old. You'll be in charge of Potentia in the future. I believe you'll handle your relationship with Potentia well," Plomet said calmly. He didn't have any children. Paulette was his younger brother, but he was more like his son. Late at night there was a commotion in the Dionia camp, waking the Devers up from their sleep. "What happened?" The Devers calmly looked at the substitute guard Captain Rodham and the herald Tormid as they walked into the house. "Sir, the Samani attacked the camp and were discovered by the sentries. Because it's in the 2nd Legion's defense zone, Legion Commander Amintas has already led a team to attack. I believe they'll be defeated soon," Tormid said. Chapter 427. Speaking of this, the Devers quieted down and listened carefully. It seemed that the noise outside was much quieter. He calmed down and yawned. "It seems that the battle is over. You should all go to sleep." Tormid and Rodham bade farewell and left. "Amintas has such a strong desire to fight. I have to try my best to keep him going until the battle against Syracuse," the Devers murmured as he fell asleep. The next morning, Plomet and Borat came to visit the Devers. After a friendly conversation, the two left in satisfaction. The Devers was also happy. He quickly called the captain of Legio III, Alexis, and said to her, "Just now, the great leader of Potentia came to me and requested to hand over the city of Poseidonia to Dionia." This is great," Alexis said excitedly. "Yes, I did not expect him to make such a decision so decisively." Although many Lucanians despise Plomet, saying that he is neither as brave as Acapairu nor as smart as Sinsing, that he is a coward who only knows how to stay at home and sleep with his wife. But the forces of those two people have been destroyed, and Potentia will continue to exist. Those who can understand the general trend and go with it are truly wise people. Plomet is decisive when he needs to and gives up when he can. He is amazing. The Devers was quite emotional. He turned back to look at Alexis and continued, "Today, I called you here because I have an important task for you to do." Alexis immediately sat up straight when she heard this. Although the Samani have been defeated, there are still nearly 20,000 defeated soldiers fleeing in all directions. According to the investigation of the Mountain Reconnaissance Team, except for 3 larger teams that are retreating to the north, the rest of the defeated soldiers are scattered in the mountains around Potentia, suffering from hunger and disease. But their existence has also hindered the plans of the tribes of Potentia to return to their settlements. I've decided to leave the Legio III behind and station here to clear out these Samani soldiers. Borat will lead the Potentia warriors to cooperate with you. As soon as the Devers finished speaking, Alexis hurriedly said, "My lord, the war with Samni has ended, and Syracuse's army is attacking Greece. We should immediately return to Thurii and concentrate our forces against Syracuse. Don't worry about Syracuse. I have my own plans. To tell you the truth, I've always felt that the Samni would be a headache when the alliance expands to the north in the future. But unexpectedly, this time, they gathered a large number of troops, took the initiative to leave the mountains they were familiar with, and attacked Lucania on a large scale. Under the protection of Hades, the Samni suffered a crushing defeat, while our losses were not great. In the face of an injured beast, what we have to do is to seize this opportunity and kill it while it is weak. We can't let it go and wait for it to recover before it causes trouble for us. Therefore, the Legio III must try to eliminate and capture the Samni people here as much as possible, and not let them escape back to the north. While completing this task, we can try to attack the Samni mountains to see if there are further gains. But be careful not to expand the scale of the war and attract new enemies. You have to understand that with the current situation of Dionia, it is impossible to support two battles. The Devers warned solemnly. I understand. I will try my best to expand our victory. Alexis was excited after understanding the Devers' intentions. After all, being able to independently lead an army to conquer an area was the greatest pursuit of any general. I have also found a capable helper for you, the Devers said and shouted towards the outside of the house. Marcius, let him in. Alexis looked curiously at the door and saw a skinny, capable young man walk in. Supreme Commander. The young man gave a standard military salute. Printos, the captain of the reconnaissance company, the mastermind of the defeat of the Samni camp. After the Devers returned the military salute, he sized him up and could not help but praise. Amazing! Really amazing! The victory you created saved time for Dionia, allowing us to concentrate on dealing with Syracuse. On behalf of the people of Dionia, I thank you. Your name will be remembered in the Hall of Valhalla forever. Printos was both excited and a little embarrassed by the Devers' praise. He quickly said humbly, Sir, this is all because of the plan you made to capture Asprostum city last time. Victory without arrogance. The Devers nodded, feeling more and more satisfied with this young man. I will transfer 2 companies from the Mountain Reconnaissance Company, a total of 400 people, under your command. They will assist Legio III and Potentia's army in hunting down the Samni soldiers, and at the same time, invading the neighboring Samni territory. Can you complete this mission? I can. Printos answered confidently. The Devers nodded without batting an eyelid, turned around and said to the Legio III captain, Alexis, are you satisfied with the assistant I have assigned to you? I can't be more satisfied. Alexis smiled and said, but it also increases the pressure on me. With the help of such a hero, if I don't have a decent battle record, I will be embarrassed to return to Thurii. It is good that you understand this. The Devers also smiled and continued, I hope that you can take down Kopsa if possible. Kopsa? This was the first time Alexis had heard of this term. That is the town closest to Potentia in Samni, about 40 miles from here. Printos said to Alexis. As someone who came from the reconnaissance team, he had stayed here for almost a day and had some understanding of the surrounding environment. This is a wish of the great leader of Potentia. If we take down Kopsa, Syracuse will be completely under the protection of Dionia, and from then on, there will be no need to worry about the Samni invasion. The Devers further explained. In the morning, when Poimet made this request to him, the Devers understood. Potentia had made up its mind to completely rely on the Dionia alliance. Of course, you have to do what you can and don't force it. The battle in the south of the alliance will be very fierce, and the supplies will definitely be very tight. You have to pay special attention to this problem, and don't cause another big war in the north. The Devers emphasized this sentence again. Alexis and Printos looked at each other and immediately expressed that they understood. There is one more thing. Plomet hopes to build a road to strengthen the connection with our Lucania territory. This is a good thing, and I have already agreed to it. I am going to let Bagul take over this matter, and Alexis will be the assistant. Seeing that Alexis wanted to speak, the Devers waved his hand and said, "After all, you have been a construction officer and are very familiar with building roads. At the same time, you have a good relationship with Bagul, so I believe you can cooperate well. Right now, there are tens of thousands of Samanai captives as ready-made labor, but don't let them die of exhaustion. These captives will be of great use to me in the future." "I accept this task," Alexis said helplessly. Seeing that he answered reluctantly, the Devers had to remind him. Building this road will not only strengthen the connection with Potentia, but it will also be beneficial for the future expansion of our Dionia into the central part of Apennine. Therefore, building the road and pursuing the Samanai soldiers are equally important. There is no conflict. "Sir, I understand. I will do my best to help Bagul and the others build this road." In the early morning of the same day, Sesta was rushing to the Senate. The outbreak of this war had a great impact on the city of Turin. Most of the First and Second Legions were Turin citizens. Then, 2 new legions were formed, and they were also mainly made up of Turin citizens. Every day, they trained in the military port of the Crati River to the east of Turin. Therefore, there were almost no young men in the city. As for the elderly and women, out of worry for their loved ones, they appeared less and less in the square. Most of them stayed at home or prayed in the temple. Sesta looked at the empty Victory Square and felt a little disappointed. "Sir Sesta!" A shout came from behind him. He turned around and saw that it was the senator from Brudi, Bagalipi. "With Sir Sesta accompanying me, I won't be afraid even if I'm late," Bagalipi said half jokingly and half seriously. He was small and wore a white Bolton robe with black trim, which represented his identity as a senator. It looked like a thin bamboo pole hanging on the wide robe, so he tried his best to pull the corner of the robe with both hands, looking rather comical. However, Sesta did not laugh. As the censor, he had the function of supervising the performance of the senators during the Senate meeting. Now, because of the treason case of Polixus and the other senators, under the suggestion of the Devers, gave the censor the great power to supervise the crimes of the senators and the public officials of the alliance. Because of the heavy responsibility on his shoulders, Sesta had always set an example. However, he did not expect to be late today. He could not help but explain, "Last night, I was busy sorting out the information about supervising the elections in various cities and the establishment of local councils so that I can report to everyone at the meeting today. In the end, I was busy until late into the night and woke up late today." Chapter 428. Seeing this, Sesta quickly advised, "Lord Bagalipi, you don't have to worry too much. Felicius is the commander of the Southern Front recognized and appointed by Lord Devers. He is also a veteran general who has been through many battles. Also, he is an honest man. His analysis of the battle should not be exaggerating. We have a high chance of winning the battle. The report sent by the wise Lord Ansitanos also agrees with Felicius' analysis. We don't have to worry too much. The local council election may be delayed for a while. After we chase away the people of Syracuse, it will still be held." Yes, you are right." The two comforted each other and walked up the steps of the Senate Hall. At this time, Sesta saw Petaru coming up from the other side. He walked quickly into the hall as if he did not see Sesta. Of course, Sesta did not have the habit of greeting unfamiliar people warmly. Instead, Bagalipi sighed. "It seems that Petaru still has some opinions about your investigation of him. He will be fine after a while," Sesta said coldly. "I am only doing my duty. Whether others are happy or not has nothing to do with me." Hearing this, Bagalipi could only keep quiet. "Lords, the warships of Syracuse have cut off the sea trade routes of Dionia. Whether it's heading to the eastern Mediterranean or the other regions of the western Mediterranean, our alliance's merchant ships have already been captured and detained by the Syracuse Navy. The merchant ships from other cities that came to trade with our alliance have also been forcefully expelled. Now there are almost no merchant ships entering the port of Tullage. Due to its remote location, the ports of the other cities have stopped operating, except for the port of Picassus that can still operate normally. Due to the war, the soldiers at the front lines have to consume a large amount of supplies every day. If this situation continues, we will not be able to obtain supplies through sea trade. I am afraid that the grain supply of the entire alliance will become tight. I suggest that the Senate take measures to remind the people to save food and forcefully control the consumption of food. For example, temporarily closing the restaurants and reducing the people's 3 meals a day to 2 meals a day. When Marigi finished speaking, the senators were in an uproar. Is the situation really that bad? Cornellos asked nervously. Yes, the grain consumption has exceeded our expectations. Agriculture Officer Bagalipi added, although we do have food reserves, we have already transported 2 granaries to supply food to the 5 corps in the north and south for the first time. According to the statistics of the Ministry of Military Affairs, this food can only last for 10 days. As you all know, we've only built 6 granaries in the Alliance's territory in the past few years. If the war continues for another 2 months, I'm afraid that the grain reserves will run out. All the elders present became nervous. Cunigarata immediately got up and said, "The sea is blocked, we can buy from Tarentum by land." Mercis shook her head and said, "Marigi and I had thought of this idea a long time ago. We also sent public officials to Tarentum to discuss it, but the Tarentum Senate said that they were also short on food and had no surplus to sell. Damn Tarentum! They've forgotten who helped them chase away the Messapi. How ungrateful! We should take the alliance agreement and question them properly." Scombras, the current chief executive of Amendola, cursed out loud when he heard that. Now is not the time to settle accounts with Tarentum. Syracuse and Salmoni are already difficult for us to deal with. Moreover, our relationship with Tarentum has not been harmonious for the past 2 years. If we push Tarentum too far and it really does what the Devers are worried about, we'll be in trouble. Cornellos said worriedly. What is our fleet doing now? The Alliance spends so much money on building warships every year. Now is the time when we need our navy. Tritodermos asked loudly. The navy commander, Sicerian, is doing his best to reorganize the warships from the various alliances. At the same time, he is training the new tactics proposed by the Devers with the new corps, Hieronymus replied. The new tactics designed by the Devers? Tritodermos was excited. Can they defeat the Syracuse Navy? The Turii military port is tightly sealed every day. Outsiders are not allowed to enter. I'm not sure about their training, Hieronymus replied and kept quiet. It seems that we can't count on the navy for the time being. I hope that the southern Italian coalition led by Sir Felicius can stop the attack of Syracuse. Although Scombras was nearing 60 years of age, his personality was more radical. However, he still held a cautious attitude towards the upcoming battle in the south. It was obvious that the others were also worried about their own gains and losses. After all, the Southern Alliance army was not the entire Dionysian army. Felicius's leadership ability naturally could not be compared to Consul Davis's in the hearts of the elders. Do you have the latest news? Has the Devers led the army to fight the Simonians? Sidorum asked. The news I received was from yesterday. The Devers have led the army to Elia. Today's battle report has not been delivered yet. The answer of the rotating chairman, Cunigarata, disappointed the elders. Someone sighed. Our battle report is still too slow. It's already very fast. You should know that Lucania City is all mountainous. Based on the previous speed, I'm afraid it would take more than 4 to 5 days to reach there. Now it's much shorter. Heraclid, who had just joined the Senate and did not usually speak much, retorted. My lords! Cunegurata reminded loudly. Although according to the analysis of the battle report, our coalition has a high chance of defeating the people of Syracuse, we have to be prepared for the worst. We must once again strictly order Lord Agathia of Aspustum and assistants of Cenopatisha to make full preparations to defend the city according to the decision we discussed yesterday. In case the battle fails, we must do everything possible to stop the enemy outside the territory of Dionia. At the same time, we must also prepare to assist Tarentum. Only then can we hold the line of defense from Cenopatisha to Aspustum to Tarentum and delay the enemy until the return of the army led by the Devers. Lord Cunegurata is right. We must have a backup plan. The coalition led by Lord Felicius has more troops than the enemy, and with our army as the main force, we should be able to repel the enemy. Have the cavalry scouts been sent out? Let them report back every half an hour about the battle situation of the Turris in Siriton. The Senate expressed their opinions one after another, but they all felt a sense of nervousness and worry in their hearts. After the meeting ended, the senators did not disperse. They sat in the hall and chatted in twos and threes. They wanted to wait for news from the southern battlefield so that they could make a quick decision. So they even let their servants bring lunch to the Senate at noon. Cunegurata walked straight to a corner of the hall, where Plazinas and Marigi were whispering something. When they saw Cunegurata coming over, the two immediately stopped talking. Lord Plazinas, I heard that something abnormal has happened in the Temple of Hades these days, Cunegurata said in a low voice. Oh, what abnormal situation! Why haven't I heard about it? Plazinas looked confused. Handwriting that suddenly appeared and disappeared, and the sound of the statue from time to time. Cunegurata said word by word, his eyes fixed on Plazinas. Plazinas suddenly understood. Lord Cunegurata, you are talking about this. This is not an abnormal phenomenon, this is a miracle of the Hades. Something like this had happened before, but it was happening more frequently recently. This shows that the Hades is protecting our alliance. Plazinas looked pious. Seeing his expression, Cunegurata wanted to say something several times but stopped himself. Finally, he warned sternly, now is the moment of crisis for the alliance. We need to ensure the stability of the political situation in the alliance and work together to deal with the powerful enemy. As the chief executive of the Turris, I do not want there to be any major turmoil in the city. I believe that Lord Devers also does not want to see a big mess in the city. Seeing Cunegurata's dignified expression, Plazinas was stunned. Marigi, who was next to him, immediately interrupted, Lord Cunegurata, I am very curious, what do you mean by handwriting that suddenly appeared and disappeared? Cunegurata looked at him warily and said, You can ask Plazinas. After saying that, he turned and left. The rumor about, with my blood as king, protect the peace of the alliance, had gradually spread. It was said that it had spread to Amendola, Abyssinia, and Castellan, which made Cunegurata very uneasy. What he wanted to know now was, did Plazinas make this decision on his own? Or was it the idea of the Devers? If it was the latter, then what should he do? He sensed it. Plazinas looked at Cunegurata leaving and said to Marigi, Anyone with a brain can sense it. Marigi shrugged disdainfully, but what can they do if they know? Just now, Cunegurata did not even dare to say, What is that handwriting? When it really happens, I am afraid that he will be the first to raise his hand to show his approval. Don't worry, Cunegurata is a smart man. Marigi's words made Plazinas feel relieved. Actually, I hope that today's battle will fail. Marigi's voice became softer, but it shocked Plazinas again. Lord Devers has led the citizens of the Alliance to victory in every battle, which is why we have such a large territory today. But the people have already forgotten the taste of defeat, so they do not know the value of victory. Marigi said faintly. Compared to the desolation of the city of Turris, in the early morning of the same day, the clouds of war were thick in the territory of Cirium. Chapter 429. The area was not very flat. The ground was uneven, with small mounds and thorny bushes everywhere. To the west was the Ramato River, while to the north was the middle reaches of the Colac River, which flowed from northwest to southeast. Obviously, Felicius had chosen to set up his formation here because he had considered the strength of the Syracuse cavalry. He wanted to use the terrain to the greatest extent to limit the cavalry's maneuverability and detour. At the same time, such a terrain was undoubtedly more advantageous for the legion of Dionysia's infantry, who had better adaptability and agility. Of course, Dionysius could see that the terrain was disadvantageous to his side, but he still led his army forward. More than 100,000 people from both sides had gathered on this land with a radius of more than 10 miles. They were densely packed, like mountains and seas, stirring up dust and sand into the air. Dionysius squinted, trying his best to look forward. Even though his vision was obstructed by the dust, the black attire of the Legion of Dionysia was particularly eye-catching. Moreover, they were right in front of Dionysius. The Dionia army is in the middle. Dionysius was reassured. He had also invested his most elite 15,000 soldiers in the middle. They were all mercenaries from Campania and Greece, and had followed him to conquer Sicily for many years. More than half of them had been granted citizenship and land, becoming new citizens of Syracuse. They were his most loyal and trustworthy core strength. Based on the past battles of the Dionia, their focus of attack is on their left flank. Phoebidas reminded. I suggest we deploy at least 20,000 soldiers on our right flank to block the enemy's attack. Dionysius did not reply immediately. He tilted his head and looked to the left. What he saw was the flickering silhouettes of the southern Italian army in formation amidst the dust. The noise and commotion extended beyond his line of sight. A moment later, he ordered, "Send all the Syracuse militia to the right flank." The messenger received the order and galloped towards the east. Dionysius turned to Sparta and said in a deep voice, "Phoebidas, I appoint you as the commander of the right wing. I hope you can lead the army to stop the enemy's attack and buy time for victory. I hope you can accept this." "It's my pleasure." Phoebidas gladly accepted his fate. He did not have the arrogance to say, "I'm from Sparta, you don't have the right to order me around." It was Phoebidas's first and last time leading more than 20,000 soldiers to participate in such a large-scale battle. The temptation was too great for him to refuse. Also, if you run into trouble, you have the authority to order the Namibian and Celtic cavalry on the outside of the right flank, Dionysius emphasized. Phoebidas felt a sense of trust and gave Dionysius a rare military salute. "Astagras," Dionysius shouted. "Here. Lead the Sicilian city-state army and defend the left flank together with the Hyhernian army. Remember, I only need you to hold the enemy back. You don't need to advance too recklessly, understand?" Dionysius sternly ordered his brave subordinate. "Yes, sir." Astagras' heart skipped a beat. "Commander, Trine's army has arrived at the battlefield. Sir Cypros asked me to inform you that Tryllus' army has a total of 8,500 soldiers." The messenger arrived on horseback and reported to Felicius. 8,500! Felicius was shocked to hear this number. Did this not mean that there were only a few hundred soldiers left to defend Trine? When they were discussing the plan for today's battle yesterday, the Trine representative had said that they could send up to 6,000 soldiers to participate in the battle. He did not expect that there would be an additional 2,500 soldiers today. Immediately, Felicius thought of the Trine's intention. They were preparing to go all out in this battle. At this moment, Felicius was also greatly encouraged. He said loudly, "Go and tell Lord Acetius to move the portion of the Zelidian army that was supposed to be stationed at the right flank to the left, so that the Hammer's Head will be even thicker." "Yes, sir." A messenger turned his horse around and rode east. Go tell Sir Cypros that the Trine army is to stay close to the Legion of Dionysia on the right flank. The distance between the far end of the phalanx and the Ramato River should not be too large. This is to prevent the enemy's cavalry from taking a detour and harassing them. Yes, sir. Another messenger rode west after receiving the order. Seeing the messenger disappear into the dust, Felicius once again looked at the Dionia soldiers in front of him. Only by watching these well-trained soldiers skillfully form their troops and get into formation could he feel at ease and dispel the anxiety and frustration in his heart. After watching for a while, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He said, "Immediately inform the 2 legion commanders, Dracos and Epthenes. Tell them to slow down the formation of the soldiers and wait for the allied armies on both sides. Don't expose our intentions too early." Yes, sir. The other 2 messengers rode forward. Felicius is too cautious. With the strength of our army, there is no need to play such trick. Just blow the horn and charge straight in. Dracos was a little dissatisfied after receiving Felicius' order. However, he did not dare to disobey his superior's order. Thus, he said to his adjutant, "Go tell the officers to slow down and get into formation. Don't get excited too early. Slow down and save your energy and spirit for the moment of the charge." Understood, Legion Commander. If it wasn't for Lord Felicius' reminder, I almost forgot about this. Adjutant, hurry up and tell the brothers to slow down and wait for the Trine next to them. However, to be honest, it's easy to get them to speed up, but to slow them down, we haven't practiced this for many years. Haha. Epthenes teased as he gave the order. The adjutant held back his laughter and said, "Understood, Legion Commander." In the long formation of both sides, hundreds of messengers rode back and forth to deliver orders. Amidst the noisy and chaotic formation, the officers of various ranks were also shouting loudly. 2 huge square formations were slowly taking shape. It took a long time for more than 100,000 people to get into formation. The speed at which Syracuse completed the formation was faster than the Southern Legion. After all, most of their troops came from the same city-state and often fought together, unlike the Southern Legion, which not only came from multiple city-states, but also fought together for the first time. By noon, the loud noise gradually died down, and the dust that filled the air gradually dissipated due to the soldiers' stillness. The soldiers at the front of the 2 phalanxes could clearly see the enemy hundreds of meters away. In their eyes, the opponent's dense phalanxes were like a thick steel wall that stretched endlessly to both ends. The midday sun of early winter was not scorching, but when it shone on the soldiers' shiny armors and weapons, the dazzling light was so bright that it was impossible to look at them directly. Only when their eyes fell on the Dionia phalanxes, the distinctive uniform of the Legion of Dionysia naturally attracted the attention of the Syracuse soldiers, and made their hearts palpitate, because black always meant something bad. The sea breeze blew from Squalish Bay, cooling the sweaty, heavily armored soldiers who had just gone through a torment. Military flags of various sizes fluttered in the wind in the long formation of both sides. The largest flag was erected behind Dionysius, and not only was it painted with the traditional 3-legged symbol of Syracuse, Dionysius's real name was also embroidered on the flag. In comparison, the enemy commander of the Southern Legion, Felicius, was a little shabbier. Due to the short time he took office, as the commander of 2 legions, the Ministry of Military Affairs did not have the time to specially make a military flag statue for him, and could only use a military flag statue and a simple flag. Felicius did not care about this. At this moment, he was watching in shock as the military flag representing Dionysius slowly moved forward. After a while, the military flag had moved to the front of the formation, and a general in golden armor followed closely behind the military flag. With such a gorgeous outfit, it should be Dionysius himself, right? Felicius hesitated for a moment, and then spurred his horse forward. The 2 met in the middle of the battlefield. Dionysius sized up Felicius with a sharp gaze, and Felicius returned the stare without showing any weakness. "You are the commander of the Southern Legion? You are the tyrant of Syracuse, Dionysius?" "I am Dionysius. I am the commander of the Dionysian army, the commander of the Southern Legion, Felicius." Under Dionysius's silent gaze, Felicius subconsciously raised his voice. "Felicius, it seems that your subordinates do not agree with your title of commander." Dionysius turned to look at both sides of him, a mocking smile on his face. He saw cavalry galloping towards him from both east and west. The city-states of the Southern Legion are treated equally, unlike the Greek city-states of Sicily. Felicius blushed slightly as he retorted, mimicking the tone of his colleague in the Senate of Dionia during a debate. Dionysius laughed heartily. "In a battle, shouldn't an army follow the orders of one person to ensure unity? I think your Archon Devers should be very clear about this. Didn't he tell you?" Felicius realized that he was no match for Dionysius in terms of eloquence, so he simply remained silent and stared coldly at him. Dionysius's smile faded, and a sinister expression appeared on his face. "You are right about one thing. I alone have the final say in the Greek city-states of Sicily, and after this battle, Greece will also be under my control." Chapter 430. Dionysius nodded slightly, then turned his horse around and returned to his formation. "Dionysius, stop right there!" shouted Escamas, who had rushed over. "I've already met with your general. You generals have no right to speak to me." Dionysius laughed loudly, then urged his horse to return to his formation. "What did Dionysius say?" asked Escamas, who had rushed over. What else could he have said other than declaring war? The good-tempered Felicius could not help but feel a little angry. Cowardly Dionysius, he didn't even dare to stay a little longer, and he still dared to declare war on us. Escamas spat in the direction of Dionysius. At this time, Acetius and Cypros had arrived. Felicius had also calmed down. Taking advantage of the precious opportunity of everyone gathering together, he looked at the three of them and said solemnly, "Sir Cypros, you must control your army well. Don't focus too much on attacking, just defend. The Dionysian army will defend the right flank with the Trine soldiers." "I'm not worried about being with the Legion of Dionysia," Cypros laughed. Felicius once again gave a final reminder to the general of the Cyrodian army. "Sir Acetius, please take note. The right flank of the phalanx you lead must try to maintain the same speed of attack as the Dionia army. As for your left flank, please attack boldly with the Crotone army." Acetius nodded to indicate that he understood. Felicius finally looked at the Crotone general, who seemed to be prejudiced against Dionia, and said sincerely, "Sir Escamas, the victory of the southern Italian coalition army and the peace of Greece all depend on the Crotone army. Don't worry, my lords. The warriors of the Crotone army are already prepared. We're just waiting for the bugle to be blown, then we'll charge and defeat the Syracuse army in one fell swoop." Escamas was full of heroism. Felicius looked at the generals, who were both nervous and excited. He raised his right fist and shouted, full of hope, "The gods will bless Greece. The gods will bless Greece." The other three responded. 4 fists slammed together, then they turned their horses and returned to their formation. In the Greek city-states of the western Mediterranean, there were 2 gods that were highly respected. One was the sun god, Apollo. Apollo was not a powerful god, but in addition to being in charge of the sun, literature, and archery, he was also blessed with luck. In the great colonial era, wooden ships full of colonists sailed to the unknown western Mediterranean Sea. They all hoped to be lucky enough to avoid the storms at sea, successfully reach the land, find a land with fertile water and grass to settle down, and avoid encountering the fierce indigenous people. If they survived and built a city, they would think that it was a blessing from Apollo. But what was the most important thing after they settled down? Of course, it was to multiply, strengthen the tribe, increase their strength, chase away the natives, and expand their territory. Thus, the other god that was highly respected was the goddess Queen Hera, who was in charge of marriage, family, and reproduction. Among the cities that participated in the war today, Apollo was the protector of the cities of Syracuse, Crotone, Cirium, and Trine. Even though the armies of the cities had already divined with the sun god before they rushed to the battlefield, the soldiers still prayed to Apollo for blessings before the battle began. However, the prayers came from both sides. How was Apollo supposed to choose? Only the soldiers of Dionia sang a hymn to the Lord of Darkness, who was terrifying in the hearts of the Greeks. Aphrodite sang the last part of the hymn to Hades like his other comrades. O great Lord of the underworld, the just and selfless arbiter, may my name shine on the hall of Valhalla when I die a heroic death. May my soul be led by you to the Elysium that everyone yearns for. The soldiers felt their fear vanish, and their bodies were filled with strength. Brothers, prepare your equipment and put on your helmets. The voice of the squad leader rang out. Aphrodite immediately placed the spear and 2 javelins in his right hand on the long shield in his left hand. He took off the open helmet that was hanging on his shoulder and put it on. He pulled down the leather ear protector and fastened it to his chin. When he was done, he saw from the corner of his eyes that his comrades on both sides had quickly put on their helmets and resumed their defensive posture. He felt that this new helmet was much more convenient. His eyes could see what was going on around him, and his ears could hear the words of his comrades. The old Corinthian helmet did not work. When he wore it, he felt as if his eyes and ears were immediately deaf and blind. He could only see the enemy in front of him, and could only hear the sharp and sonorous sound of the bugle, as if he was alone in the darkness. Only the occasional swaying figure of his companions beside him and the surging strength of his comrades behind him could make him feel real. If a person with a weak heart were to wear the Corinth helmet for too long, he would definitely go crazy. Aphrodite often had such thoughts during his daily training. Thus, after experiencing the benefits of the new helmet, he did not want to wear the Corinth helmet again. There was a saying in the Legion that the new helmet could not protect one's face. He scoffed at it. A person's reaction to any attack aimed at his face was the fastest. If he could not even dodge this, then he was not a qualified soldier of the Legion of Dionysia. Looking at the Syracuse soldiers covered in bronze armor a few hundred meters away, he felt a sense of pity for them. The familiar sound of the bugle that he had heard countless times in the training field rang out. It was loud and majestic, but it gave him a different kind of excitement. Forward! Following the squad leader's orders, Aphrodite held the shield in his left hand and the spear in his right. He and his comrades slowly advanced to the sound of the military drums. In between the small phalanxes, countless soldiers in leather armor rushed out of the phalanxes and charged towards the enemy. It was a spectacular sight, just like the countless times he had trained. Aphrodite knew that the first to meet the enemy would be his comrades from the light infantry brigade. He and his heavy infantry comrades skillfully switched a javelin to their right hand and advanced calmly, waiting for the moment to throw the javelin. After 2 days of racking his brains and meticulous preparations, Felicius, who was nervous, suddenly relaxed as the bugle sounded. He muttered, "It has finally begun." But he quickly regained his spirits and told the herald and the cavalry scouts to keep him updated on the progress of the entire battlefield. The battle had just begun. He had to be like the Archon Devers on the battlefield in the past. He had to be 100% focused and ready to deal with all kinds of unexpected situations until the end of the battle and the arrival of victory. At that moment, Dionysius's attention was not on the battlefield. Have the reinforcements set off? What's their position now? The fleet led by Lord Leptinus set sail from the port of Hyrnion with 10,000 soldiers half an hour ago. They may have reached the mouth of the Ramato River by now. The other army led by Lord Phasippeses set off from Hyrnion early in the morning. It is estimated that they have crossed the Coerta River by now. The adjutant made his own judgment based on the information he received from the cavalry scouts. At that moment, a messenger galloped over from behind. Report. Lord Phasapeses has led his army into the camp and sent me here to ask General Quan for his next order. Dionysius smiled in satisfaction. It seems that the Phasapeses has performed well this time. It has exceeded your expectations, Damocles. The adjutant, Damocles, smiled fawningly. Because of your stratagem, the Greeks have been completely fooled. Victory is at hand. The Phasapeses also wants to make a contribution as soon as possible. Otherwise, the battle will be over and victory will be yours alone, my lord. Dionysius smiled again and ordered, "Let the Phasapeses lead the soldiers to rest in the camp and recover their strength. The battle has just begun." The Dionia's 4th and 5th legions advanced quickly, but their attempt to directly attack the Syracuse infantry phalanx did not succeed. This was because Syracuse had also sent out a large number of light infantry, so the battle began with the light infantry. For a moment, arrows and javelins crisscrossed. People from both sides screamed and fell. The Dionia light infantry were more well-trained, while the Syracuse light infantry had more battlefield experience. As the 4th and 5th legions were formed the latest, especially the 5th legions, which had not participated in a real battle, the two sides were evenly matched. When the main forces were almost 100 meters apart, the Syracuse light infantry retreated. They had to withdraw from the battlefield before the heavy infantry of both sides collided. Otherwise, they would be crushed into a bloody pulp by the huge impact. The Dionia light infantry did not retreat. The Legion of Dionysia's more complex and smoother formation gave them the confidence to quickly withdraw from the battlefield before the heavy infantry of both sides collided. Therefore, they were not afraid of the approaching Syracuse's mountainous formation, and quickly fired another 2 rounds of arrows and javelins. The arrows flashed coldly and flew down. Some hit the thick Corinth helmet and bounced high, causing the Syracuse soldiers to feel slightly dizzy. Some were blocked by the round shields, but other than making small dents on the smooth copper shields, they did not cause any damage. Only the exposed arms and thighs of the soldiers could cause them to lose the ability to fight, but such casualties were too few. However, the damage of the javelins was much greater. Not only could they penetrate the breastplate, but they could also penetrate the round shields, making it difficult for the soldiers to defend with their shield. Chapter 431. The experienced Syracuse soldiers stared coldly at the front through the narrow eye holes of their helmet. Although they had yet to face the Dionia soldiers head-on, they knew that a bigger attack was coming. Hence, they quickened their pace. The Dionia light infantry quickly retreated through the passageway between the phalanxes. The infantry at the back quickly moved forward and soon, the entire Dionia formation was connected. At that moment, the enemy was within 50 meters of them. Without the need for orders from their commanders, Ephiart and the other heavy infantry soldiers stepped forward, raised their arms, and hurled their javelins. Tens of thousands of javelins flew out from the 2-kilometer-long front line of the coalition army. The Syracuse phalanxes covered the sky as they flew towards the Syracuse phalanxes. The Syracuse soldiers were prepared for this. They placed their shields above their heads and formed a long bronze wall. The death whirlwind caused by the rain of javelins could no longer be covered by the screams of the Syracuse soldiers. Hence, the Syracuse soldiers began to run faster. Ephiart and his comrades who were at the front line did not have enough time to throw another javelin. Without hesitation, they threw away another javelin, held the shield in front of them with their left hand, and the spear in their right hand as they charged forward. They had to run as fast as they could within the short distance of 30 meters. On one side was a golden wall, and on the other was a black wave. Apollo! Hades! 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 Amidst the deafening battle cries, both sides collided with each other. At that moment, even the earth trembled. At that moment, Ephiart felt a huge force colliding with his shield. It almost broke his hand that was holding the shield, causing his body to involuntarily lean back. At that moment, an equally powerful force came from behind and pushed him back. His spear was blocked by the round shield of the enemy, and his shield blocked the spear of the enemy. Due to the huge force from both sides, both spears were broken. Ephialtes endured the pain in his right hand and pulled out the short sword at his waist. The soldiers of both sides squeezed together, leaving little space for each soldier to move around. The Dionia soldiers at the forefront tossed away their spears regardless of whether they were broken or not, and switched to short swords. On the other hand, many Syracuse soldiers picked up their curved sabers, and the close combat began. In the middle of the Legion of Dionysia, the Dionia had the upper hand in the battle of light infantry, but the Syracuse light infantry had the upper hand in the other battle lines. Because the Crotone, Silitans and Trine did not have the habit of harassing the light infantry in front of the heavy infantry phalanx, they suffered many losses. Their solution was to increase their speed and engage in direct combat with the Syracuse heavy infantry as soon as possible. Apart from Dionia, the light infantry of the Allied forces were all concentrated at the left end of the entire left wing of the formation, behind the cavalry. When both sides were engaged in close combat, only this area remained peaceful. Felicius knew that in terms of cavalry, the Allied forces' cavalry was far inferior to the Syracuse cavalry, both in terms of quantity and ability. Therefore, he gathered the 500 cavalrymen led by Soberkos and the cavalrymen of other cities together, forming a group of 1,500 cavalrymen to guard the flank of the Allied forces' left wing and prevent the enemy cavalry from making a detour. Because the outside of the Allied forces' right wing was the Ramato River, Felicius believed that the Syracuse cavalry would not be stationed there. He also warned them not to move out easily. Once the enemy cavalry attacked, they were to let the 4,000 light infantry behind them use long-range firepower to disperse the enemy. With the help of the cavalry's charge, they should be able to resist the fierce Syracuse cavalry. Felicius' real killer move was on the left wing. The formation he arranged was similar to the strategy used by the Devers to defeat the Bruttii on the Cosenza Plateau. That was, the weaker troops were arranged on the right wing, relying on the river to ensure the safety of the flanks, and using the strengthened left wing to win. However, unlike the battle at Punat, the Allied forces' left wing at this time had weak cavalry and strong infantry. 17,000 Crotone infantrymen and tens of thousands of Silesian infantrymen, a small number of Silesian infantrymen were close to the middle, formed the left wing. The thickness of the formation alone was more than 40 rows. After Phoebidas arrived at the right wing of Syracuse, although he did not know the details of the enemy's arrangement, he stood in front of the formation and watched. Just by looking at the densely packed spears that extended backward, the experienced him immediately realized that once the bugle was blown, the enemy's attack would be very shocking. He quickly made a decision. Similarly, thicken the formation on his side. However, this way, the length of the formation on the right wing, which had fewer troops than the enemy, would inevitably be shorter than the enemy, and it would be easy for the enemy to surround them from the flank. At the same time, Phoebidas made a surprising decision. He ordered the soldiers on the right wing to immediately form an arc-shaped formation, protruding outwards. This way, during the battle, the soldiers of Syracuse would be in the inner circle, naturally making up for the lack of length of the formation. When the bugle was blown, nearly 30,000 infantrymen on the right wing of the southern Italian Allied forces marched forward majestically towards the enemy. Among the soldiers of Crotone, there were many citizens like Columns who had been captured by Dionia twice. They bore the guilt of being defeated, experienced the decline of Crotone from glory, and watched helplessly as their former enemy, Dionia, rose rapidly. Their hearts had always been intertwined with loss and confusion. Therefore, today, like their general, Ascamas, they would use a victory to prove themselves, to prove the glory of Crotone. Even though the strength of Crotone was far inferior to that of the city alliance of Dionia, this was the pride of the people of Crotone, the nature of the citizens of a country of movement. Therefore, even if the arrows rained down from the sky, they could not slow down the speed of their advance. Under the situation where they tried their best to maintain their formation, they gradually increased their pace. The huge formation let out a terrifying roar, and the soldiers of Crotone began to charge. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the approaching enemy, their faces a mixture of nervousness and excitement, only looking forward to the arrival of that terrifying and enchanting moment. "Apollo!" They roared unbridledly, and suddenly collided with the soldiers of Syracuse. Generally speaking, when the heavy infantry of both sides came into contact with each other, the entire formation from the back would begin to push forward. In order to prevent the enemy from pushing them back step by step, which would eventually lead to the collapse of the formation, the infantry of both sides would not only stick close to their comrades in the front, but they would also try their best to push forward with their spears, hoping to increase the threat of the soldiers in the front. At the same time, they would push forward with all their might, causing the space occupied by the soldiers in the front to become smaller and smaller. Effiart was not worried. Like usual, he lunged forward, squatted slightly, and leaned forward. The half-length shield almost covered his entire leg, torso, and neck. From time to time, he would borrow the force from his back to push the shield forward. The force was concentrated on the bronze semicircular ram in the center of the curved shield. The force was considerable, and if it collided with an unprotected enemy, it would be enough to cause a fracture in the enemy's chest. When it collided with an enemy's round shield, it would also cause a dent in the sturdy bronze shield. On the other hand, when the round shield of the Syracuse soldier collided with the shield, the circular ram of the shield would cause the round shield to slip, causing it to hit the wrong spot. Furthermore, the force transmitted by the round shield would spread to the entire curved shield through the ram, and when it reached Effiart, the force would be much smaller. This gave Effiart enough time to catch his breath. While Effiart tried to disrupt the enemy's defense with his shield, his right hand tightly gripped the half-meter-long double-edged short sword, waiting for an opportunity. From time to time, he would stab and pull it out from the gap between him and the enemy. It was a pity that the two Syracuse soldiers next to him seemed to be very experienced, as they dodged his attacks many times. The thickness of the troops in the middle of the Legion of Dionysia and Syracuse was about the same. Since their strength was almost equal, the pressure in the middle was even more severe. Effiart was getting closer and closer to the enemy, and he could even feel the hot breath coming out of the tiny slit in the middle of Colin's helmet, just below the middle nosepiece. When he saw the pair of cold eyes suddenly light up, he instinctively lowered his head and raised his shield. Bang! The enemy's kukri knife slashed at the shield. When he lowered his head, he suddenly saw something, and his heart was instantly filled with excitement. It was the enemy's foot. Although the Greek round shield was large, it was not as long as the long shield. The enemy's foot, which was wearing leather sandals, was exposed under the round shield. If Effiart had not raised his shield, he would not have been able to see through the gap. He immediately used his shield to block the enemy's round shield, lowered his head and bent his waist. If he was wearing Corinth's helmet, he would not have been able to make such a large bend, and stabbed the short sword in his right hand diagonally downward. The sharp tip of the sword pierced through the back of the enemy's right foot without any resistance. Hearing the enemy's shrill scream, Effiart did not bother to look at the outcome of the battle and quickly pulled back his short sword. As he pushed his shield forward, he took a step forward with his left foot. When the enemy screamed and fell to the ground, and the enemy behind him was about to take his place, Effiart squeezed into a small gap in the enemy's shield wall. Chapter 432. Effiart quickly withdrew his dagger and hid his body under his long shield, dodging the spears and sabers of the enemies in front and behind him. His teammate on the right also seized the opportunity when the enemy fell to the ground and squeezed forward to his side. While fighting side by side with him, they also shattered the enemy's shield wall. In that split second, Effiart had injured two people in a row. In close combat, the combination of the long shield and dagger of the Legion of Dionysia was obviously more dangerous than the combination of the round shield and saber of the Syracuse heavy infantry. After all, the Greek saber had a certain degree of curvature and was more suitable for slashing than stabbing. The round shield did not provide as much protection as the long shield. The Syracuse people had to be more focused because the sharp tip of the sword would occasionally pierce through the gap between the shield and the shield. If they were not careful, they would be injured. On the left flank of the coalition army, the Crotone citizen soldiers, known for their wrestling and boxing skills, continued to unleash their violent power. Although Phoebidas had strengthened the formation of the right flank of Syracuse, he could not increase the number of soldiers he led. Therefore, under the pressure of the Crotone people, the right flank of Syracuse slowly retreated as a whole, causing the arc of the formation to become more and more crooked. However, Phoebidas was following the tradition of the Sparta people. He was standing at the front of the phalanx to fight the enemy. Even if he felt that the situation was a little bad, he could not leave the formation to make some arrangements to change the situation on the battlefield. He could only hope that the mercenary cavalry could faithfully carry out the plan before the battle. In fact, the mercenaries and cavalry of Syracuse had already begun to move. In the face of such an exciting battle, the more belligerent Namibian and Celtic cavalry had long been eager to go. Akelida whistled, and about 2,000 Namibian cavalrymen charged out with him on horseback. They gradually formed a thin column as they galloped past the coalition army cavalry. They let out strange roars and threw javelins at the coalition army cavalry. The coalition army light infantry immediately fired arrows at the enemy cavalry. Because the Namibian cavalry was charging forward in a single row, their formation was loose, and they were moving quickly. There were not many who fell off their horses. However, there were many coalition army cavalry who were pierced by javelins at the same time. The Allied cavalry began to get restless, and Soberkos repeatedly called for them to remain calm. When Akelida led the Namibian cavalry in a big circle and turned back from the dust, ready to carry out another round of javelin throwing, many of the coalition cavalry finally could not hold back and rushed head-on. With them taking the lead, the other cavalrymen followed suit. Soberkos could not stop them at all. Although he was the temporary commander of the Allied cavalry, the Dionia cavalry did not make up the majority of the Allied cavalry. There were only 500 of them. Moreover, in the eyes of the Greeks, the cavalry was the privilege of the nobility, a stage to display one's bravery. The organization of the cavalry had always been loose, so how could they obey the orders of Sobisox? Soon, Soberkos discovered that only the Dionia cavalry and the Allied army's 4,000 light infantry soldiers were left standing. Achille Rita smiled when he saw the coalition cavalry pouncing on them. He nimbly manipulated the reins and quickly turned the charging war horse into a diagonal gallop. Then, he turned east and sped up his retreat. Because he was at the head of the team, the Namibian cavalry behind him could see his movements clearly and immediately followed suit. The entire Namibian cavalry turned around and ran east. The coalition cavalry thought that the enemy was fleeing and urged their horses to give chase. Soberkos was in a dilemma. Should he chase after them? Or should he stay behind? There seemed to be enemy cavalry watching from a few hundred meters away in the dust, but as the commander of the coalition cavalry, if Soberkos did not act with the cavalry of other cities, it would be a disgrace to Dionia's magnanimity as the leader of the Southern Alliance. He would be suspected of sitting back and watching the coalition cavalry fail without rescuing them. Soberkos thought about it again and finally made a painful decision. He first briefed the light infantry commander and told them to pay attention to the remaining cavalry on the opposite side. Then, he led 500 Dionia cavalry and rushed in the direction of the coalition cavalry's pursuit. Not long after the Dionysian cavalry left, the light infantry of the Allied army heard the rumbling of hooves, accompanied by a soul-stirring roar. It was as if thousands of drums were beating ferociously, causing the entire ground to tremble. "Shoot! Shoot!" The coalition light infantry commander was scared out of his wits and shouted anxiously. The light infantrymen had never seen cavalry charge at such a high speed on such uneven ground. They charged out of the dust and fog without a care for anything else. The pursuit of extreme speed and the momentum of not fearing death scared them so much that their hands and feet turned numb. They hurriedly shot their arrows and turned to flee. The Celtic cavalry that was active in the Po River valley of northern Italy was like a sharp blade that sliced through the scattered light infantry of the Allied army. Horses neighed and people screamed. Many Celts fell from the war horse that had come to a sudden stop, while the coalition light infantry were either stabbed by spears or sent flying by the war horse. Most of them fled in all directions. How could the bloodthirsty Celts let them go so easily? They urged their horses to chase after them, and stabbed the fleeing enemies one by one. Then, they jumped off their horses and, according to the Celts' battle custom, cut off the heads of the stabbed soldiers and hung them on the backs of their horses. Soberkos never imagined that the 4,000 coalition light infantry he had high hopes for would be defeated so quickly by only 800 Celtic cavalry. However, at this moment, he did not have the time to consider the situation of the remaining light infantry. Felicius had originally chosen this place to fight to limit the performance of Syracuse's cavalry. Now, due to the rash attack of the coalition cavalry, the terrain had become a hindrance to them. It was not a big problem for them to slow down and fall off their horses. The most dangerous thing was that the Namibian cavalry was much more agile in riding on the war horse. They were even like toying with children, choosing to ride on the uneven areas and throwing javelins at the coalition cavalry that was chasing them from time to time. Their comrades who fell off their horses from time to time caused the coalition cavalry's formation to become thinner and began to shrink back. However, when the Namibian cavalry saw that the coalition cavalry was not chasing after them, they took the initiative to stick close to them. Soberkos, who was chasing from behind, used his calmer mind to notice the dust rising on both sides of the coalition cavalry's chaotic pursuit formation. He immediately felt nervous. The enemy was trying to outflank the coalition cavalry. Get them to retreat. Get them to retreat. Soberkos immediately urged the messenger beside him. Before the messengers could speed up, the Allied cavalry had already begun to retreat in panic. They finally realized that compared to the mercenary cavalry of Syracuse, their horsemanship was far inferior. If they continued to chase, they would be in danger of being annihilated. However, how could the Namibians let their prey that had fallen into their trap escape so easily? Although the big net had not been fully spread, Akelita still blew the horn. The Namibian cavalry with disheveled hair, wearing only simple cloth robes, and riding on the back of the war horse so smooth that there was not even a cushion, immediately outflanked the coalition cavalry from 3 directions at the same time. The coalition cavalry ran back in panic like birds that had been caught in a net. Some even fell off their horses out of fear, and were trampled into meat paste by the running war horse. This time, the Dionia cavalry ran at the forefront of the entire retreating and pursuing team. When Soberkos led them back to their original garrison, hoping that the 4,000 coalition light infantry stationed there could stop the enemy's pursuit, the scene that fell into their eyes shocked the Dionia cavalry. The coalition light infantry that was originally arranged in a swan-shaped formation was no longer there, only human and horse corpses, and groaning wounded soldiers everywhere. Some bare-chested indigenous people, that is, the Celts, were rummaging through the corpses. From time to time, they would stab the wounded soldiers who were still alive, and even cut off their heads. Seeing such a tragic scene, even the experienced Dionia cavalry felt their hearts palpitate. When the Celts saw the cavalry coming, they quickly mounted their horses and prepared to intercept them. At such a critical moment, Soberkos had no time to think too much. Go north! Go north! Soberkos waved his spear and pointed forward. There was only one thought in his mind: to lead these terrible foreign cavalry away, lest they bring trouble to the entire battle. Soberkos took the lead, and the Dionia cavalry led the frightened coalition cavalry to retreat to the Colac River. The upper reaches of the Kalake River were neither wide nor deep, but when Soberkos urged his horse to run down the sloping embankment, the front hooves of the war horse suddenly slipped. He was too tired to hold the horse's neck and was thrown to the ground by the frightened war horse. Bang! Soberkos fell heavily to the ground. He immediately felt a sharp pain in his leg. The pain almost made him faint. He was already old and screamed, "Oh no, my leg is broken!" He put his hands on the ground and tried to stand up, but it was futile. It only made the pain worse. "Captain! Captain!" When the Dionia cavalry saw Soberkos fall from his horse, they immediately rushed towards him anxiously. Their change in direction immediately hindered the advance of the cavalry behind them. The Dionia cavalry and the coalition cavalry were crowded together on the riverbank, causing the retreat of the cavalry in this area to almost come to a halt. Men shouted and horses neighed. It was a mess, and the enemy was rapidly approaching. Soberkos endured the pain and shouted, "Don't worry about me! Go quickly! Go quickly! Don't let the flag fall into the hands of the enemy! This is an order!" As he shouted, he sat on the ground and solemnly placed his right fist on the left side of his chest. Most of the Dionia cavalry returned the military salute with tears in their eyes. They then turned their horses around and rushed into the Kalake River. Chapter 433. Go! Go! If you don't obey orders, you'll be punished by military law! Soberkos roared. His face was covered in sweat and tears. The rest of the Dionia cavalry finally turned around and left. Soberkos seemed to have exhausted all his strength. He fell backward, his right fist still firmly pressed against his chest. The blue sky, the white clouds, and the dazzling sun. The sunlight that shone on his body was so warm. A smile appeared on Soberkos' face. "Long live Dionia," he murmured. At this moment, he was not thinking about Turii, who gave birth to him and raised him for decades, but the Dionia alliance that was only established a few years ago. When the enemy's spear pierced his chest, he did not dodge. Instead, he closed his eyes. In the depths of his heart, he saw the beautiful Elysium that was revealing its full appearance to him. In Treen, there were only about 500 militia in the city. There were no other citizens. It was almost an empty city. Why did this happen? Because when Cypros proposed to send the most soldiers to participate in the battle at the citizens' assembly, the citizens questioned him, "If the enemy suddenly attacks Treen during the battle, how can we defend the city with so few soldiers?" His reply was, "Let the people temporarily move to Canopetia and receive the protection of the Dionysia alliance. They will only return after the victory of the war." In the end, the reason why the citizens' assembly passed his seemingly absurd proposal was because Syracuse's main camp was on the riverbank not far away. Syracuse's huge fleet was wandering in the bay, like a tiger lurking in the grass, waiting for Treen at any time, causing the citizens to fear day and night. Therefore, they all hoped that the victory of this battle would completely eliminate this huge threat. After obtaining the approval of the acting governor of Canopetia, more than 40,000 Treen citizens brought their food and belongings north to seek refuge. After Cypros left with 8,500 soldiers, there were less than 500 militia left in the city. They closed the city gates and nervously monitored the movements outside the city. "Look, Syracuse's fleet." A soldier pointed to the sea outside the port and shouted nervously. For the past 2 days, Syracuse's ships had been entering and exiting the Ramato River, and the people of Treen were somewhat used to it. But this time, not only were there cargo ships, but there were also warships, and the number was astonishing. There seemed to be no less than 200 ships. There are soldiers on the ships. When the Syracuse fleet sailed into the Ramato River, and was very close to Treen, the soldiers on the city walls could clearly see that there were 2 ships entering the river, one after the other, and each ship was filled with soldiers. I'm afraid there are more than 10,000 people. It's impossible for us to defend this city with just these few people. Let us retreat now." The Trine soldiers screamed in panic, but they soon discovered that the huge fleet did not stop near the Trine River. Instead, they sailed straight upstream. The soldiers breathed a sigh of relief, but the Trine General Blomalas, who had been looking down at the two dragons in the Ramato, had a grim look on his face, and a terrible thought occurred to him. "Immediately ride your horses to the battlefield. Tell the coalition commander that tens of thousands of Syracuse soldiers are on their way to the battlefield. I hope they—" At this point, Blamatos suddenly thought of something and could not continue. According to the report from the scouts, the Allied army had already started fighting against the people of Syracuse. All the units of the Allied army should have sent in all their forces. Even if the generals knew about this, what could they do to stop the enemy's reinforcements? Looking at the equally nervous messenger, Bulamathos tried to calm himself down. "Go quickly." "Yes." The messenger turned and was about to leave the city wall. Bulamatos said cautiously, "After you send the message, stay near the battlefield. Once the battle is over, come back and tell us immediately." "Faster! Faster!" Leptinius stood behind the piper, who controlled the rhythm of the oars and personally gave the order. Under the fast beat of the drums, dozens of sailors rowed the oars with all their might. This was the 50-oared warship at the forefront. It moved quickly on the surface of the water, and naturally, it brought the fleet at the back and the side of the ship forward. Coupled with the southeast breeze, the entire fleet did not slow down even though they were going against the current. Even though the fleet was moving quickly, Leptinius's expression was still solemn. As the commander of the navy, the crushing defeat against Carthage a few years ago had almost caused him to lose his brother Dionysius's trust. Hence, since the start of the battle, he had made up his mind to redeem himself. He wanted to prove his ability to Dionysius, and to the people of Syracuse who mocked him for sitting in his position based on blood and not ability. Hence, he had to arrive in time for the battle. He could not disappoint his brother Dionysius and embarrass himself. "The river confluence is just ahead," the lookout who was leaning on the mast shouted. Leptinius quickly walked to the bow of the ship. In front of him, the calm river forked, one to the left and the other to the right. Leptinius's tensed face finally showed a hint of excitement. "Prepare to turn the rudder to the left." In fact, there was no need for him to give the order. The experienced helmsman was already adjusting the course of the warship. Watching the warship steadily turn into the left side of the river and continue to cut through the waves, Leptines finally smiled. According to the map that Dionysius had sent someone to give him yesterday, he knew that there was a large stretch of flat beach on the right side of the river 4 miles ahead. That was the place where he had determined that the fleet would land. To ensure a smooth landing, he did not bring a single 3-oared warship with him. That was because a 3-oared warship was too large and long. Not only was it not suitable for docking on the beach, it could easily obstruct the navigation of other ships. "And Amenas, my lord," the leader of the Campanian mercenaries on the same ship replied. "Get ready, it's all up to you soon," Leptinius said encouragingly. Most of the landing troops carried by Leptinius's fleet were Campanian mercenaries. Compared to the civil militia of the city, these mercenaries were more experienced and could fight on their own without relying on a tight phalanx. This was also the reason why Dionysius had chosen to let them fight on the land. For the sake of this battle, Dionysius had racked his brains. He had even considered some of the details. However, Leptinius did not like these mercenaries, especially the Celts and Namibians. He felt that these natives were barbaric, bloodthirsty, indiscriminate, looting, and disobedient. If it were not for the sake of victory in this war, he would not even want to get close to them. Ha ha! My brothers can't wait to kick the ass of the great Greek. This is probably the easiest battle we've ever fought for Lord Dionysius. And Amenas laughed loudly. He had been holding back his energy to make a great contribution and gain Dionysius's recognition. Macias, who had also come from Campania and started out as a mercenary, but had now turned into a courtier of Dionysius, was his role model. "You're right, Chief. We only need one charge to make the enemy kneel and surrender." The mercenaries on the ship were full of confidence. Dionysius had indeed thought things through. However, he did not expect that before the battle, he had repeatedly reminded the leaders of the Namibian and Celtic cavalry to assist the right flank. However, these warlike foreigners had reverted to their old ways. After defeating the allied cavalry, they were busy chasing, killing, and looting the spoils of war. They had long forgotten Dionysius's orders. This caused the right flank led by Phoebidas to continuously retreat without support. The right flank, which was still struggling to hold on, was almost pressed into a semicircle. What Dionysius did not expect was that in the middle, the 15,000 Syracuse elite infantrymen, who he had high hopes for, were slowly retreating in the confrontation with the Dionian army, which had a similar number of soldiers. After a period of stalemate in the beginning, they were slowly retreating. The retreat of the middle also affected the left flank. After receiving urgent reports from the left, middle, and right flank, Dionysius felt that the entire front was retreating. Yes, the entire formation. He no longer had the carefree mood he had at the start of the battle. He ordered his adjutant, Damocles, and his attendants to stand close to the back of the middle formation, shouting at the soldiers to encourage them to perk up and fight back against the enemy's attack. However, amidst the roars, screams, and the loud noise caused by the clash of spears and shields, the effect was almost negligible. The middle formation was still slowly retreating. "What's going on? Why haven't the reinforcements of the Facipizas arrived yet?" Dionysius asked anxiously. His irritation affected the war horse he was riding, which kept shaking its head and neighing. "Sir, the messenger has just reported that the troops led by the Facipizas are only a mile away from the right flank," Damocles immediately replied. "You go!" Dionysius pointed at him. "Direct the Facipizas directly to the right flank and attack the enemy's flank." "Yes, sir." "Where is Leptinus' fleet now?" "They have already passed the position of the left flank, sir." Chapter 434. The Trine messenger galloped on his horse. As the Romelo River was too deep for him to traverse, he had no choice but to make a big detour to the north. By the time he reached the battlefield, he had already worn out the skin on the inside of his thighs. His horse's belly was stained red, and he was on the verge of collapsing. When he saw the Dionia scouts approaching him, he shouted, I'm the messenger of Trine. Syracuse's fleet is carrying tens of thousands of soldiers from the Romelo River as reinforcements. Quick, go and report to your commander." Felicius was in a good mood. Although the defeat of the allied cavalry had worried him for a while, the Syracuse mercenaries were busy chasing the retreating soldiers instead of helping their infantry to reverse the situation on their right flank. Therefore, while he was feeling lucky, he also mocked the Syracuse cavalry in his heart. Although they were strong, they lacked discipline and the ability to see the big picture. Now, Dionia's left flank was advancing, the middle was advancing, and even the right flank was advancing. Felicius had already ordered the flag-bearer to move the erected flag forward. It seemed that it would be moved again. Soon. Felicius was calculating how much longer the Syracuse people could hold on. At that moment, he was certain that victory was as ripe as an apple. It was within reach. But at that moment a scout galloped from the west. Reporting, "Commander, Syracuse reinforcements are landing at the Romelo River. There may be tens of thousands of them." After receiving the notification from the Trine messenger, they rushed to the riverbank to confirm. What they saw shocked them. "What did you say? Tens of thousands of enemy reinforcements?" Felicius, who was in high spirits, felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over him. "Yes, Lord Commander. Tens of thousands of Syracuse reinforcements. They're about to land on the riverbank a mile behind our right flank." The scout shouted anxiously, "We have to stop them!" This shocking news caught Felicius off guard. His slightly panicked gaze swept across the people around him, and the people around him also looked at him nervously. He was the commander of the Allied forces, and everyone was waiting for his orders. Felicius realized this. He coughed twice to calm his flustered emotions. "Order! 2 light armor squads and 2 light infantry squads, immediately rush to the riverbank where the enemy has landed. Stop them at all costs, don't let them attack our rear." "Yes!" "Blow the bugle again. Urge the 4th and 5th legions to speed up the attack. Hurry up and inform the 2 corps commanders and the 3 generals, Cypros, Aeschylas, and Escamas of our current dangerous situation. Tell them not to hold back and attack the enemy with all their might." Everyone immediately obeyed the order. After everything was set up, Felicius finally had the time to think. Where did the enemy get reinforcements of tens of thousands of people? Could it be Medma's troops? However, the Trine people had said that Medmar was just a small city. How could it send out tens of thousands of citizen soldiers? Felicius had yet to think about the Syracuse troops besieging Carunia city, because the scouts of the Allied army had been reporting that more than 40,000 of the Allied army of Silo had been preparing to attack the city. Of course, he did not know that at this time, in order to help the Allied army of southern Italy, General Phaedon of Lygium's army had even taken the risk of leading an attack on Medmar, hoping to force the Syracuse troops to return and disrupt Syracuse's plan. However, from this moment onwards, the unease in Felicius's heart began to grow. From the middle of the formation to the shore where Syracuse had landed was a full 6 miles. Although the Dionia light armor squads and light infantry were fast, they still needed some time. By the time they reached the riverbank, most of the Campanian mercenaries had already disembarked and begun to form up. Although the enemy was large in number and occupied the entire riverbank, the soldiers of Dionia bravely charged forward. Under the guidance of the military flags held high by the team officers, the Dionia soldiers bravely charged forward according to their usual training habits. 2,000 light infantry poured arrows and javelins at the enemy, while 2,000 light armor squads, armed with leather shields and daggers, charged forward as if they were flying, directly colliding with the loose formation of the mercenaries. The surprise attack of the Dionysian army was beyond Leptinius's expectations. Based on the past battle habits of the Greek city-states, he had thought that at this stage of the battle, both sides would have committed all their forces to victory. He did not expect that the Allied army of southern Italy would still be able to divert a troop to stop Syracuse's reinforcements. Of course, he did not know that it was not that Felicius had already known of Dionysius's plan, but that there was a rule in the Dionia military law that stated, as a commander, during a battle, he should maintain a reserve force so that he can enter the battlefield at the critical moment to change the situation. That was what Felicius did. The 2,000 light armor squads were his reserve force, while the 2,000 light infantry squads, after completing the initial attack, retreated to the rear of the formation and became part of the reserve force. The sudden attack of the 4,000 Dionia soldiers threw the Campanian mercenaries, who had just disembarked, into a state of confusion. At this critical moment, Leptinius hurriedly directed the remaining ships to quickly dock. As the commander of the Syracuse navy, his original task was to transport the reinforcements ashore. Leading the reinforcements to attack the enemy was the task of the mercenary leader, Imenes. However, now that Imenes was in a state of confusion among the soldiers, it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Leptinius had no choice but to shoulder the heavy responsibility of rescuing him. He jumped off the ship and ordered the remaining mercenaries to immediately disembark. The mercenaries had already seen what had happened to their companions. They were very anxious. Some of them did not even wait for the ship to dock before they jumped onto the beach. After Leptinius hurriedly reorganized his troops, he led them around the mercenaries who were forced to retreat and were on the verge of collapse. Braving the rain of arrows from the Dionia light infantry, they attacked the flank of the Dionia light armor squads. The fierce attack of the light armor squads was forced to a halt. In fact, the long-distance march and the previous swift and violent attack had consumed a lot of their stamina. The chaotic mercenaries at the front finally recovered and began to make use of their advantage in numbers and heavy armor. The casualties of the Dionia light armor squads rose sharply. If the 1st and 2nd Dionia light armor squads were here, they should be able to hold out longer. However, most of the 4th and 5th Dionia light armor squads were from Bruttii and Lucania. Born as mountain people, the combat education they received from a young age taught them to know how to avoid the enemy when they were at a disadvantage instead of fighting head-on. Although they had received military training and discipline from Dionia during the years they were in the Alliance, the desire to save their lives prevailed in times of adversity. The Dionia light armor squads retreated. Without a barrier, the light infantry squads naturally retreated as well. At this time, the battle had lasted for nearly an hour. Due to the physical exhaustion of the soldiers, both their fighting and their roars had weakened. However, suddenly both sides sounded the bugles and drums at the same time, urging the enemy to attack. The soldiers on both sides had to fight with their last bit of strength, speeding up their offense and defense. For Dionysius, he only had one thought at this moment: withstand the enemy's attack before the reinforcements arrived. For Felicius, he also had only one belief: break through the enemy's formation before the enemy's reinforcements arrived and establish victory. Both sides had reached the critical moment to decide the outcome of the battle. Ephiart, who had several knife wounds on his arms and thighs, was so tired that he could not even lift his shield. The hand that was holding the short sword was trembling slightly due to the long period of overexertion. The sound of his panting was like that of a seriously ill patient. The enemy on the other side was in a worse state. Due to the heavy armor, he had already thrown away his round shield, and was holding his spear with both hands. His whole body was swaying. Ephiart did not despise them in his heart. In the previous battles, no one from the Legion of Dionysia had used the unique feature of their formation, which was to swap the rear formation with the front formation. He believed that it was because the pressure from the enemy was too strong and they were too close to each other. Hence, the Legion commander did not dare to change the formation easily. In fact, the other main reason for not changing the formation was that this was the first time the 4th and 5th Legions had participated in a battle. Faced with a strong enemy, they were facing the Alliance army on their left and right side. It was also their first time fighting together. Felicius was afraid that if they changed the formation hastily, the soldiers would make mistakes under the pressure. In addition, the Alliance army did not understand and did not cooperate. After all, swapping the rear formation with the front formation would require the entire formation to gradually retreat, which could lead to chaos. The sonorous sound of the bugle not only urged the soldiers on both sides to hurry up, but also other troops, such as the mercenary cavalry of Syracuse, who were leisurely returning after chasing the Alliance cavalry. Of course, there were also 2 Syracuse reinforcements rushing to the battlefield. According to the habits of the general of the Crotone Legion, Ascamas, he would definitely line up at the front of the formation and fight the enemy face to face. However, before the battle, Felicius requested the generals of the Federation army to sit at the rear and not participate in the battle, so that it would be easier to communicate. At that time, Ascamas had mocked the people of Dionia for being afraid of death. Now, he should be grateful for Felicius' request, because he heard a different bugle sound coming from the opposite side. The bugle sound came from the outside of the Crotone Legion. It was sonorous and ear-piercing, and it was getting closer and closer. Then, in his field of vision, countless soldiers in bright armor suddenly appeared, Syracuse's reinforcements. Ascamas panicked and actually fell from his horse. He watched helplessly as they roared and rushed towards the rear formation of the Crotone Legion like a tide. Chapter 435. Report. Lord Commander, our blocking troops have been repelled. The enemy is attacking our right flank. Although Felicius was mentally prepared, he still felt his heart palpitate when he heard the news. He stared anxiously at the dust-filled area in front of him. The figures and voices were still the same as before. The Diolia legion that he had high hopes for still showed no signs of breaking through the enemy. "Lord Commander, what should we do?" the aide-de-camp asked anxiously. Felicius was silent. The Allied forces did not have the strength to stop the enemy's reinforcements at this moment. His heart was in a mess, but he still had a sliver of hope. However, this hope was quickly shattered. "Lord Commander, enemy reinforcements have appeared on the right flank. There are tens of thousands of them. They are attacking Crotone's rear fiercely. Crotone can't hold them off. They are already retreating." "What?" Felicius and his followers were dumbfounded, as though they were struck by lightning. The battle-hardened Felicius was the first to regain his senses. He immediately yelled, "Retreat! Blow the retreat horn! Retreat immediately!" Since the Allied forces' defeat was certain, then, they had to bring the 4th and 5th legions back safely. Under Felicius' pained gaze. Woo! 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 The retreat horn resounded from the rear of the Allied forces. Not only were the Dionysian soldiers shocked, but the various officers were also in disbelief. "Is Felicius crazy? We're about to break through Syracuse's defense, and he dares to ask us to retreat at this moment." Dracos was furious. Even though a messenger later conveyed the reason why Felicius chose to retreat to him, he still found it hard to accept. "Give me a little more time. A little more time. Wait for my legion to defeat the enemy before retreating. The legion of Dionysia has never been defeated before. We cannot lose this honor in our hands. This is a disgrace." Hearing their commander's pained roar, the surrounding people lowered their heads sadly. "We've lost." Epicthenes gripped the mane of his warhorse tightly after hearing the messenger's words. The tame warhorse neighed in pain and kept digging the ground with its front hooves, but Epicthenes did not notice it at all. "Move the flag." He squeezed the words out of his mouth with great difficulty. His face was already glistening with tears. When the bugle was blown, the army soldiers had to look at the direction of the military flag. This was because the battlefield was very noisy, and it was difficult to distinguish between the enemy and their allies. Only with the help of the military flag could they confirm that there was no mistake. "Look, the flag is moving." The Dionia soldiers who were looking back were in an uproar. Not only were the regimental flags, but the platoon flags as well as the company flags were also waved behind them. "Congratulations, my lord. The Hellenes are routed, and you have won the battle. This is a great victory. From now on, you have the final say in this land." Faced with the praise of Damocles, Dionysius did not feel too proud. Victory was within his expectations after all, 70,000 versus 50,000. However, he did not expect Syracuse's most elite heavy infantry to be completely suppressed by Dionia's so-called legions on the battlefield. Most importantly, these were the 4th and 5th legions made up of foreign races. Dionysius had been rather diligent in collecting information on Dionia. If they had encountered the 1st and 2nd legions, what would Syracuse's heavy infantry do? Therefore, even though they had won, Dionysius still remained vigilant. "Although the enemy has been routed, the battle is not over yet. Continue to urge the reinforcements on both flanks to continue the pursuit. Kill and capture more Greeks, especially the Dionia. Bring all the messengers to me and find Achelita and Gubra. Tell them that I am very angry at them for disobeying orders and assisting in the attack on the enemy's right flank. Unless they immediately pursue the enemies in black armor, kill as many of them as possible, and capture as many of them as possible. Don't even think about getting a single silver coin as a reward." Ephiart had practiced how to retreat in his previous military training. He did not expect to use it in his first battle. After throwing his shield at the enemy with a pained expression, He turned around and ran with his short sword in hand. The enemy threw a saber at his back, causing him to stagger and almost fall. Effiart quickly got up on all fours. His unit was already more than 10 meters away from the enemy's formation. He looked at the fluttering military flag and hurriedly chased after them. The moment when he turned around to escape was the most dangerous moment. Some soldiers were stabbed by the enemies that caught up to them. Seeing their comrades fall to the ground and cry for help, the Legion soldiers who had always emphasized unity no longer cared about saving their comrade. They ran with all their might, hoping to put some distance between them and the enemy. The team leader shouted, "Quick! Quick! Quick!" Effiart's nervous heart was temporarily relieved when he heard the commander's voice clearly. The officer said, "Quick! Quick!" This did not mean that the soldiers were allowed to run around randomly. According to the Dionia military law, they were required to gather under the nearest military flag and move together to avoid confusion and disorganization. As they ran, Effiart heard the footsteps behind him getting softer. When he turned around, he saw that the enemy had already put quite a distance between them, and some of them had even stopped chasing. It was easy to understand that the soldiers of Dionia had exhausted their stamina while carrying heavy armor and fighting nonstop for an hour. Furthermore, in their usual military training, armed cross-country training was one of the most important activities. The people of Sparta had also done this since they were young. The soldiers of Syracuse who had already won the battle obviously did not have the desire or the ability to continue chasing after the enemy. Effiart's nervous heart calmed down even more. However, after running for a while, the main force gradually slowed down. It turned out that Legio IV's position was slightly to the right, adjacent to Trine. Amenas led the Campanian mercenaries from the west to the east in an attempt to catch up with the fleeing Trine. At the same time, the sailors of the fleets anchored on the river bank saw that there was a chance for them to take advantage of the situation. In order to obtain the spoils of war, they also went ashore to join in the interception. This made the large net of pursuit denser and denser, forcing the large group of panic-stricken fish to flee eastward. This naturally reduced the space for Dionia's Legio IV to retreat. "Quick! Quick! Quick!" Epithenes, who was standing on the bank of the Karash River, anxiously urged his legionnaires to quickly cross the river. He did not care if the soldiers could hear him in such a chaotic situation. Felicius, who was standing on the other side of the Karash River, was in even more pain. He did not expect that the river, which was chosen as a barrier to prevent the enemy cavalry from taking a roundabout route, would now become a shackle to the retreat of the Legion of Dionysia. Although the river was neither wide nor deep, thousands of panic-stricken soldiers surged in at the same time, instantly trampling the riverbank into mud. Once a panicked soldier fell, not only would it be a disaster for him, but it would also be a disaster for the soldiers behind him. Countless soldiers were entangled in the riverbed. There was no longer any order. Everyone was pushing and shoving, and the scene became even more chaotic. Felicius felt like he was seeing the tragedy in the canyon of Persia again. His cries and warnings were so insignificant in this 10-mile stretch of river that they could be completely ignored. Felicius was filled with regret and hatred. He did not dare to look again. When he turned his head, he saw a row of buglers and military drummers behind him. In an instant, an idea flashed through his mind. "Quick! Blow the battlefield march! Blow the battlefield march!" He shouted crazily, and the buglers were so frightened that they hurriedly put the horn mouthpiece on their right shoulder into their mouth. Because of their nervousness, they blew the first note out of tune, but gradually, they played it more fluently and more forcefully. The battlefield march was also adapted from a symphony that Devers had heard in his previous life. It used a majestic, powerful, and fast melody to show the fearless spirit of the soldiers rushing to the battlefield and killing the enemy. When this melody echoed in the Karash River segment, the soldiers of Legio IV who heard it were aroused with courage and honor, and gradually regained their rationality. The chaos in the riverbed was also alleviated. At the same time, Felicius ordered the light-armored soldiers who had previously retreated from the riverbed to go down to the riverbed and form a dense formation to separate the Trine people. This would reduce the disruption to the orderly retreat of the 4th Legion of Dionia. In an emergency, they could even use force to drive them westward. At this moment, Felicius had no choice but to harden his heart against his allies. Sir Commander, the 5th Legion. The main force of the 5th Legion has not reached the riverbank yet. An adjutant hurriedly rushed over to report. What? Felicius felt like his head was about to explode. The first wave had not yet subsided, and another wave had arisen. He could not help but be furious. What is Draco's doing? Due to Draco's unwillingness, he hesitated on the issue of retreat. Most of the soldiers heard the buglers but saw that the military flag had not moved, so they did not dare to retreat. It was only when Dracos realized that the left and right troops of the 5th Legion were all retreating, and the 5th Legion was about to become an isolated army that he hurriedly ordered a retreat. Chapter 436. With that, the 5th Legion should have more space to retreat to the north. However, not long after the 5th Legion began to retreat, they were targeted by Syracuse's mercenaries. After being reprimanded by Dionysius, the Namibians and Celts had no choice but to perk up and chase after the men in black armor from the east to the west. The fewer defeated soldiers along the way made it easier for them to ride. Then, they saw the retreating 5th Legion of Dionysia. The soldiers of the 5th Legion were still relatively concentrated and orderly as they retreated. This was clearly not conducive to the cavalry's charge. Even the ferocious Celts were not foolish enough to charge straight into the heavy infantry formation. However, the cunning mercenaries had their own method. They once again formed a column and rode their horses close to the Dionia soldiers. They shouted loudly as they quickly swept past the 5th Legion's formation, throwing the javelins in their hands continuously, the hurried galloping of the horses, the heart-palpitating cries, and the screams of their comrades. This caused the already low morale of the 5th Legion to become even more frantic. They sped up and ran forward, hoping to escape the terrifying enemy cavalry behind them. The retreating troops of the 5th Legion began to fall into chaos. Seeing this, Dracos made a decisive decision. Behind him was the 1st Main Company. He turned his horse around and shouted, "Brim, bring your 1st Main Company and follow me. Stop those damned cavalry. Let the rest of us retreat safely." Broom, once the leader of Abyssinia, a tough man among the Briti, and now the leader of the 1st Main Company of the 5th Legion, answered without hesitation, "Yes, Lord Commander." The bugle for the attack was not sounded, for fear of affecting the retreat of the other soldiers. However, the 1st Main Company's flag was pointed in the opposite direction of the retreat, followed by the company flag, and then the division flag, where the enemy cavalry was. Under the orders of the officers, the soldiers of the 1st Main Company turned around. As the other soldiers fled in panic, the 1st Main Company of the 5th Legion charged forward. At the front was the fully armed Commander Dracos on horseback, followed by the 1st Main Company's leader, Brim. Dracos turned back to look at the soldiers of the 1st Main Company, who were panicking but determined to follow him. He was satisfied. As expected of the men of Abyssinia, "My best soldier, my best brigade, for the soldiers of the 1st Brigade are all from Ciudad Abyssinia. To be able to fight alongside my lord is the glory of our 1st Brigade." Brim puffed out his chest. Dracos nodded and ordered loudly, "2 rows in a row. Maintain the formation and retreat slowly. Don't let a single enemy escape." At that moment, Dracos did not think about the issue of life and death. He only had eyes for the mercenary cavalry that whizzed past him. Dionysius, who had been studying Dionia's past battles, learned from Dionia this time. He made use of the high mobility of the mercenary cavalry and the 2 reinforcements, who had just entered the battlefield and were full of energy, to pursue the defeated soldiers of the southern Italian coalition until dusk, when they finally returned to camp. The route of the defeated soldiers of Trine was blocked by the Ramato River. With the warships waiting in the river, most of the soldiers were forced to retreat north with the Dionysian army in the middle of the road under the pursuit of the Campanian mercenaries and the sailors of the Syracuse fleet. The scouts sent out by Trine fled back to the city in panic and reported the news of the defeat to the garrison stationed in the city. Everyone fell into a great panic. General Blommaras saw that the main army could not return, and the city of Tolina was alone, unable to deal with the incoming army of Syracuse. He had no choice but to make a painful decision, to give up the city of Tolina and withdraw the soldiers to the city of Canopetia of the Dionysian alliance. The lookouts of the Syracuse warships that cruised the port discovered the unusual movements of the Trine garrison. After the Trine army left, they sent sailors ashore to test the waters and easily occupied an empty city. Just like that, at dusk after the Battle of the Ramato River, Syracuse occupied Trine, giving their army an excellent foothold in the center of Great Greece. The materials needed by the Syracuse army could be transported by sea to the port of Trine for transfer, which was convenient and safe. However, Dionysius was not satisfied. His greedy eyes stared at Silatina, which was not far from the battlefield. The situation of the Silatina soldiers who participated in the battle was more tragic. They fled east and squeezed together with the defeated Crotone soldiers, wasting precious time. Their route east was cut off by the reinforcements of the Phasapeses. Behind them, some of the Syracuse soldiers led by Phoebidas did not care about fatigue and persisted in their pursuit. As a result, some of the Silatina soldiers were killed in battle, some surrendered, and some were carried north by the defeated Crotone soldiers. Only about 3,000 of them managed to escape back to Silatina. Because the 4th and 5th legions of Dioria in the middle were further away from the enemy's flanks, and because their allies helped to stop them involuntarily, their retreat was relatively smooth. Apart from some setbacks when crossing the Karash River, they did not suffer many losses. However, the hired cavalry of Syracuse brought them the greatest loss. Although most of the cavalry was stopped by the 1st Brigade of the 5th Legion led by Dracos, it also delayed the retreat of Drax and the brigade, causing them to be heavily surrounded by the pursuing troops of Syracuse, and not be able to escape. The greatest fortune of Dionia was the cautious Felicius. Although he had agreed to the Allied forces to engage in a decisive battle after discussing with Ansitanos, he still had a plan in mind. He had considered the possibility of failure, so after the army got into formation, he let Ansitanos lead the 2 legions supply camp, engineering camp, medical camp, and other auxiliary personnel out of the camp, marching north, retreating to the place between Asprostum and the battlefield. Felicius' plan was that if they won the battle, Syracuse would be driven out of the Orphemia plain, and it would not be too late for the supply camp and auxiliary troops to return. But if they lost, they could no longer retreat to the camp, but should retreat to the city of Asprostum according to the instructions of the Devers before they left, and set up a new defense. Therefore, while the Syracuse army was pursuing the routed soldiers, the slow-moving auxiliary troops of Dionia had already retreated to the city of Asprostum, thus avoiding the fate of becoming prisoners of Syracuse because there were no soldiers defending the camp. Perhaps Apollo could not bear to witness such a tragic battle between the Greeks, so he let the sun set behind the mountains early, and darkness quickly took over the whole world. Apollo's sister, the goddess of the hunt and the moon, Artemis, was lazy and did not let the moon hang high in the sky, so Hades took control of the night. Logically speaking, the allied army should be thankful that they had the protection of Hades, whom the Dionia people believed in. At least the arrogant Syracuse cavalry did not dare to come out to chase them in the dark of the night, but the darkness also created a lot of difficulties for the allied army to retreat. In the dark, the routed soldiers could not see the flags and the tassels of their officers, so they could not regroup. Except for the Legion of Dionysia, which was in a slightly better situation, The rest of the routed soldiers were completely scattered. In fact, this area was at the edge of the hills, and the ground was uneven and full of potholes. Tired, hungry, panicked, and in the dark, it was easy for the routed soldiers to fall. If they could not stand up in time, they would be trampled by the soldiers behind them, so there were a lot of injured soldiers. Thousands of routed soldiers mourned the death of their comrades in the dark, while shouting the names of their officers, and worrying about their own safety, trudging forward in the dark. They felt for the first time that the road between Asprostum and Tarentum to Silentland was so long until late at night. Asprostum's governor, Agathia, who had received the news of the battle's failure, urgently sent out cavalry and citizens with torches to illuminate the routed soldiers along the way. Tarentum also made corresponding measures, and the routed soldiers finally broke away from the fear of the dark. Throughout the night, both cities were busy taking in the routed soldiers. This night was also a sleepless night for the people of Silentland. As Silentland was not far from the battlefield, the news of the battle's failure spread throughout the city immediately, and the people immediately fell into panic. By dusk, a total of more than 3,000 citizen soldiers escaped back to the city, and after that, only sporadic routed soldiers returned. In the morning, a huge army of 14,000 soldiers left the city, and in the evening, less than a third of them returned. The whole city was in a state of grief. Chief General Pertines was even more regretful. If he had known, he would not have forced the Dionia people to hastily carry out the battle. But now, the crisis of Silentland had only just begun. In the Southern Alliance, Silentland City was considered a large city. In the past, it was a source of pride for the people of Silentland, but now it had become a problem for the people of Silentland, because their defenses were severely lacking. According to the routed soldiers, they were defeated by Syracuse's reinforcements who suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Then, the military strength of Syracuse on the battlefield was probably more than 50,000 people. With such a large number of Hittites in the Syracuse army and the momentum of victory, who would Dionysius' next target be? Pertines and the council members dared to think that it must be Silentland, because the distance was too close. Now that Dionia and Crotone had just suffered a crushing defeat, they would definitely not be able to send reinforcements to Silentland in a short period of time. If Silentland wanted to escape from Syracuse's attack, they could only rely on themselves. Chapter 437. There were victories and defeats in a battle, and there were also joys and sorrows. While the allied army was tasting the bitter fruits of their defeat, the people of Syracuse were enjoying the joy of victory. In Dionysius's tent, candles were lit, and the generals were gathered together. They ate and talked about today's battle. "All of you, stop fighting. Phoebidas is the main contributor to our victory." Dionysius sat at the head of the table. He looked around and pointed at Phoebidas. "I didn't expect that Dionia general to deploy so many soldiers on their left flank. If it wasn't for Phoebidas's strategy, our right flank would have been breached before our reinforcements arrived." "You're right, sir." Phasapeses immediately agreed. "When I led my army to attack the enemy's flank, I was shocked. The thickness of the enemy's formation. Some of them were more than 50 rows. I've never seen anything like that before. The length of each row was. Phasapeses couldn't find the right word to describe it. He gestured with his hands and said, "It's even longer than this tent." Not only did such a powerful force not defeat our right flank, it even tired the enemy out. That's why I led my soldiers in a small charge, and the enemy was easily defeated. The crowd couldn't help but gasp in admiration. Although Phoebidas felt proud of himself, he didn't boast about himself in front of everyone. Sparta wouldn't do something so superficial. Besides, he was only fighting for Syracuse. Glory or not didn't matter. He was only enjoying the joy of the battle. Being at the forefront of the battlefield, he was so tired that he didn't want to talk much. "Leptinus, your performance this time was beyond my expectations." Dionysius looked at his brother and said loudly with relief, When the attack of the mercenary army led by Endidomenes was blocked, you didn't run away. Instead, you bravely shouldered the responsibility and repelled the enemies who came to intercept us, ensuring that our attack on the enemy's right flank and rear went smoothly. We were able to obtain victory in this battle because of your contributions. In addition, your fleet also boldly attacked and obtained the first victory after our victory, Trine. Dionysius was generous in his praise of Leptinus, not only because of his brother's performance, but also because he wanted to show those who criticized his nepotism that he, Dionysius, had the correct way of using people. My lord, it's all thanks to General Leptinius' help this time. Endidomenes took the opportunity to flatter Leptinus, and at the same time, he tried to explain his mistake. I did not expect the Greeks to keep a troop in the heat of the battle. Instead of sending them into battle, they launched a surprise attack on us. That's why we didn't win this battle easily. That Dionia general isn't simple. Dionysius sighed. He had seen his elite troops being pushed back by the Legion of Dionysia when he was at the rear of the formation in the middle of the battle. Moreover, there were more than 1,000 casualties in the middle of the battle. This shocked him and made him feel uneasy. It's a pity that we couldn't keep more Dionia soldiers. The two mercenary leaders were embarrassed by his words. The more straightforward Celtic leader, Gubra, explained in a strange Greek accent, "We tried our best, but the Dionia soldiers didn't run away at all. Instead, they lined up in formation and fought with us. We lost many of our people." Those Daonians stretched out their formation and guarded the riverbank, forcing us to fight them head-on. It's very difficult for cavalry to fight against heavy infantry head-on. Echolida also tried to explain from the side. Dionysius glanced at the two of them. He only wanted to teach these two rebellious foreign leaders a lesson. He did not want to fall out with them. In any case, you managed to hold back more than 1,000 Dionia soldiers. In the end, you killed and captured them, including a legion commander. I think this is probably the biggest military loss the Dionia alliance has ever suffered since its establishment. My lord, that's because the Dionia alliance was founded not even as old as my youngest son. The other general of Syracuse, Astagras, sneered. Next, we will give them more defeats until this alliance is completely destroyed. Astagras' words elicited laughter from the crowd. Amidst the laughter, a cold voice rang from the seat on the left of Dionysius. I've seen the weapons left by the Dionia soldiers on the battlefield. To be honest, I don't think you'll be able to gain any advantage even if you fight against the infantry of the Dionia Legion again. These words aroused the dissatisfaction of the people in the tent. Sparta, you're overestimating the Dionia soldiers. Astagras yelled. I'm telling the truth. Phoebidas ignored the dissatisfaction of the crowd and said bluntly. At the same time, he strode out of his seat, disregarding the strange gazes of the people around him, and assumed the posture of a heavy infantry soldier. Then, he said in a serious tone, according to the traditional habits of heavy infantry soldiers, the round shield in my left hand can be used for both defense and offense. As for the spear in my right hand, I can raise it high and stab my opponent over the round shield. If the spear breaks, I can pull out my curved saber and slash it. However, the way the soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia fight is different from us. I've brought the long shield and short sword that the soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia use. Unfortunately, they were forced to stay outside the tent by the guard. Speaking of this, Phoebidas did not forget to secretly mock Dionysius. Because Dionysius was an expert in assassination, he was also wary of being assassinated by others. He had been assassinated many times in the past, so he was very cautious in this aspect. He had made a rule that anyone who wanted to meet him and discuss business with him must be searched by the guards. Weapons were not allowed to be carried. Once, another brother of his, who was sent by him to be the tyrant of the neighboring country, came to the palace to talk about an important matter. The brother asked for a spear from the guards and was about to draw a map on the ground. As a result, Dionysius was enraged and immediately executed the guard. At this time, Dionysius did not care about Phoebidas's sarcasm. He was more interested in what he was going to say next. He generously ordered, "Go and bring in the dagger and shield of Dionia." When the dagger and shield were placed in front of Phoebidas, he picked up the shield with his left hand and held it in front of his chest. He explained, "The shield of Dionia is long enough to better protect the body of the soldier. Therefore, the soldier does not have to worry about defense, but can focus on how to kill the enemy." As Phoebidas spoke, he made a stabbing motion with the dagger. After a few stabs, he stabbed the dagger into the wooden table. With a "chee" sound, the tip of the dagger went in completely. "What a sharp dagger!" Leptinius, who was sitting next to Phoebidas, exclaimed in surprise. He curiously went over to pull the dagger out and examined it carefully. There were some small nicks on the edge of the dagger, and the tip was a little bent. It was obvious that it had been hit many times, but it still gave off a chill. "This dagger is too short. Before the Dionia stabbed my soldiers with it again, we would have stabbed them to death with our spears." Astagras retorted forcefully, "Yes, it's shorter. But the Dionia soldiers have the protection of the shield, and the spears may not be able to hurt them. And when the two sides are pushing and shoving, the spears can no longer be used, but this dagger can easily stab the enemy." Phoebidas held the shield and looked at the dagger in Leptinius's hand. He was not calm. The round shield of the Greek phalanx was paired with a spear. This set of heavy infantry tactics had been passed down for hundreds of years, and had proved to be so effective that it was difficult for other countries in the Mediterranean region to match it. And yet, a city-state alliance that had only been established for a few years could develop a new set of heavy infantry equipment and tactics in such a short time, and could even fight against traditional tactics. This made him feel terrified. So it was because of the weapons and equipment. Dionysius was a little agitated. He had thought that his most elite army was no match for Dionia's newly built legion, and he was really traumatized. Now, after listening to Phoebidas's analysis, he suddenly realized that as long as it was not a problem with the quality of the soldiers, it could be remedied. "Phoebidas, how do you think we should deal with the infantry of Dionia the next time we encounter them?" Dionysius humbly asked the Sparta man for advice. "From the weapons and equipment of the Dionia soldiers, they don't have much of an advantage when they are in a stalemate with our heavy infantry at mid-range. But once the two sides are in close combat, the short swords and long shields will be able to play their greatest role. This requires us to not adopt the pushing and shoving tactics when fighting in phalanx, but to leave a certain distance for the front-line soldiers, and use the dense spear formation to prevent the infantry of the Legion of Dionysia from getting too close. This way, the soldiers of Syracuse can use their proficient spear techniques to gain the upper hand in the thrusts of both sides." After carefully studying the battlefield, Phoebidas had been thinking about how to deal with the impact of this new type of heavy infantry. After all, he had never really fought with the Legion of Dionysia face to face. It was just a speculation based on his years of combat experience. But it was enough for Dionysius to breathe a sigh of relief. He said to his generals, "Did you all hear that? The next time we fight the soldiers of Dionia, we will deal with them according to Phoebidas's method." Chapter 438. Of course, Dionysius would not dampen the morale of his men for the sake of Sparta. He only needed to know how to deal with the infantry of the Legion of Dionysia next time. So he smiled and said, "Of course, after this defeat, it's hard to say if Dionia will have the chance to fight us again." It was Phoebidas's turn to be puzzled. He asked directly, "Why do you say that?" Dionia did not suffer many casualties, and with the strength of their city-state alliance, it is entirely possible for them to organize another army that is not weaker than Syracuse. Dionysius smiled. "Phoebidas, you are indeed very talented in military affairs, but to defeat and destroy a country, you can't just rely on fighting." He raised his head, his sharp eyes seemingly piercing through the big tent and looking at the consul of Dionia who was trudging through Lucania city. With a sneer on his face, he said proudly, "The invasion of the Simonians is enough to give Dionia a headache, but the victory of today's battle will definitely have a huge impact on Greece. Dionia's troubles have only just begun. Before Dionia can extricate itself from the trouble and can't gather all its forces to stop us, what we need to do now is to quickly conquer the other city-states of the Southern Alliance, invade the territory of Dionia, and make its people panic and its affiliated cities tremble in anxiety." Dionysius said decisively, "Then, we can easily conquer it." "My lord is right. The sooner we conquer Greece, the sooner we can go home." Phasapeses echoed loudly. "Let's drink to the early conquest of Greece." Leptinius, who was usually low-key, became a little emotional after being encouraged by Dionysius. "We should kill more Greeks and snatch more spoils of war." Achelita grinned and said with a slightly ferocious expression. He had little interest in conquering Greece. After all, no matter how much land he conquered, he would not share it with his tribe. What he needed was more food, money, and even slaves to strengthen his tribe. The Celtic leader Gubra had the same thought. When everyone else raised their glasses, Phoebidas also stood up reluctantly. He was not sure if Syracuse could defeat Dionia easily. Would it be good or bad for Sparta? The celebration in the tent didn't last too long, because the Shelii emissary had arrived. In the battle, the Shelii courtyard's public militia had suffered heavy losses, and now they had sent an envoy in the middle of the night. Their purpose was obvious. Dionysius purposely did not appear for a long time, making the envoy, who had been left out in the cold, restless. When Dionysius appeared, he immediately brought up the Sicilian tyrant's request for Shelii to surrender to Syracuse. Dionysius already had a plan for this. He deliberately ignored it, and angrily told the envoy that Shelii courtyard had always been actively fighting against Syracuse and its ally, Rockley. Now that they had suffered a crushing defeat and their city was about to be conquered, they wanted to surrender. They were not sincere. Shelii must pay the price for their past mistakes, so that he could feel the sincerity of the Shelii people. This envoy was obviously not as young and arrogant as the one who had sent the letter of challenge. He immediately lowered his voice and begged. Only then did Dionysius's expression soften a little. If they wanted Syracuse to accept Shelii courtyard's surrender, they had to deliver 1,000 sheep, 50 cows, and 30,000 caddies of grain to Syracuse's camp by tomorrow morning. Only then would Syracuse accept Shelii courtyard's request for a ceasefire. When the Shelii envoy heard this, he immediately cried out. The amount of resources Dionysius requested was huge, and Shelii courtyard could not gather them in half a day. They hoped that the amount could be reduced by half. Dionysius's expression was cold and hard. This was the time to show Shelii courtyard's sincerity. If these resources could not be delivered to the camp by tomorrow morning, Syracuse would attack Shelii courtyard in the afternoon. The Shelii envoy hurried back to the city and informed the council of Dionysius's unyielding request. The form was stronger than the person. Faced with the pressure of the army, the higher-ups of Shelii courtyard decided to agree to Dionysius's conditions after a heated debate. They once again sent a few generals, led by Prytanes, to Syracuse's camp to negotiate, in order to determine the treatment of Shelii courtyard after their surrender. Dionysius made some concessions. Soon, both sides signed the agreement and swore to the gods. Prytanes and the others breathed a sigh of relief and hurried back to the city to prepare the resources. It was not that Shelii courtyard could not provide these resources. It was just that after handing over these things, the next half of the year would be more difficult for them. But no matter how difficult it was still better than being destroyed by Syracuse. Moreover, in order to get Shelii courtyard to surrender and join Syracuse's army to fight against their former allies, Dionysius also gave Shelii courtyard some conditions to rope them in. This tempted Prytanes and the others, such as giving Schelia Courtyard the eastern part of the Euphemia Plains, which originally belonged to Trine. In this battle, Syracuse obtained an absolute victory. This made the frightened Schelia council feel that the future of the Southern Alliance led by Dionia was bleak, and as the first Southern Alliance city-state to surrender to Syracuse, Schelia Courtyard would also reap many benefits. So from afternoon to night, the entire city of Schelia was busy. Early the next morning, the Zillians drove herds of cattle and sheep, as well as carts full of grain, out of the city in an endless stream. Of course, accompanying them were Prytanes and several other generals and attendants. They were going to discuss with Dionysius about dispatching troops to participate in the war and other matters. When the long procession was only halfway out of the city, a large number of cavalry appeared on the originally empty fields outside the city. They fiercely attacked the unarmed procession. This sudden attack caused the Zillians to panic and run for their lives. Countless cattle, sheep, and carts blocked the city gate, causing the gate to be unable to close and the drawbridge to be unable to be pulled up. Dionysius lied to us. He wants to seize our city. Prytanes only realized then, but it was already too late. Dust filled the air in front, and the rumbling of footsteps could be heard. The main force of Syracuse was rapidly approaching the city walls. Dionysius, you have violated your oath and deceived the gods. I curse you to have your eyes and heart dug out, and your bloodlines severed. Prytanes was stabbed in the chest by the Numidian cavalry with a javelin and fell from his horse. Before he died, he turned all his hatred into this vicious curse. The army of Syracuse easily broke through the defenseless city of Schelia, and this army made up of citizens of the Greek city-states of Sicily, mercenaries, and foreigners did not stop there. The Zillians panicked and wanted to escape the fallen city, but the port was filled with the fleet of Syracuse, and there were countless foreign cavalry patrolling outside the city. They had nowhere to run. As a result, the atrocities that the people of Syracuse had carried out in Catanae, Naxos, and other Sicilian city-states were now being carried out in Greece's Schelia, a massacre. Dionysius did not stop his soldiers, and even indulged them. This army, which he had deliberately allowed to plunder and pillage for a long period of time, was under his strict control. After experiencing continuous rapid marches and major battles, they needed a release. Of course, this was only one of the secondary reasons. More importantly, he was short of money. Seriously short of money. It was a little difficult to even pay the mercenaries after 3 months, and plundering was the fastest way to make money. In addition, he needed to magnify the impact of this battle, and use a shocking way to tell the Greeks that going against him would lead to such a tragic end. The army of Syracuse looted the entire city, and of course, most of the looted wealth belonged to Dionysius. Other than the countless Zillians who were killed in the process of looting, he also decided to turn nearly 70,000 Zillian citizens he had captured into slaves, including the free citizens of the port. He would transport them to the slave market in Syracuse and sell them for money. Among them, only a few were not killed in the looting, nor were they sold as slaves. Dionysius specially asked the guards to find them and protect them. They were the Schelian emissary, Silesius, and his family, who had threatened him before. Dionysius brought them to the Schelian square, and in front of tens of thousands of Schelian captives, he cruelly used a sharp military knife to cut Silesius and his family until they were covered in cuts and bruises, their flesh a bloody mess. As Silesius cursed on his last breath, he announced loudly, "Any Greek who insults me, who insults the people of Syracuse, will end up like this." He raised his hand and chopped off Silesius's head. The tens of thousands of Zillians present were silent. The reason he did not destroy Schelian city like he had destroyed Catanae was because compared to Trine, Schelian's position was more important. Not only was the city large enough to accommodate his 70,000-strong army, Syracuse had lost more than 3,000 men in the battle, but the east coast of Greece was also the main direction of his attack. He would use Schelian as an important forward base for Syracuse to attack Ionia and Crotone. Syracuse's army, navy, and especially food supplies could all be gathered here. It would be a springboard for their next advance north. Of course, the west coast, Brity region, which had high terrain and rugged roads, was not conducive for the advance of an army, and was occupied by foreign races. Although Dionysius had no desire to attack for the time being, he had his own considerations. Chapter 439. Not only did Dionysius release them, but he also gave them some gift. These Brity and Lucanian warriors originally thought that they would meet a tragic end after being captured, but they did not expect to receive such treatment. They thanked the gods for their blessings. With gratitude towards Dionysius, most of the warriors embarked on their journey back to Asprostum. Only a few hesitated for a long time before deciding to head west. They did not pass through Clapetitia, but crossed the mountain trail between the Orphemia Plains and the Brity Mountains to return to their hometown. On this day, the 4th and 5th legions of Dionia that retreated back to Asprostum suffered a total of more than 4,000 casualties. More than half of them were lost during the retreat. In particular, the 1st Brigade of the 5th Legion was completely annihilated, including the 5th Legion's commander, Drax. This was a huge blow to the soldiers, as well as to the military higher-ups such as Felicius and Epthenus. After all, Felicius was a veteran general who had seen life and death in Persia. After the defeat in the battle, he immediately realized that the situation was extremely disadvantageous for Dionia. He had to pull himself together and build an effective defense as soon as possible to stop the Syracuse army from invading Dionia's territory. This was to buy time for the Devers to lead the main force back. Therefore, in Asprostum, he reorganized the 4th and 5th legions after the defeat and personally served as the 5th legion's commander. At this moment, Epthenus also put aside his pride and actively cooperated with Felicius in training the soldiers. He discussed with the governor, Agathia, how to strengthen the city's defense. At the same time, Felicius also sent a ballista unit and an engineering battalion to Crotone to strengthen the Crotone's defense. This was because the Syracuse had cannons, and if the Crotone did not, it would increase the difficulty of defending the city. According to the newly compiled Military Law of Dionia, the chapter on defending the city specifically mentioned the principle of using ballista against ballista. As an important ally of Dionia's southern border, Crotone must not be occupied. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Therefore, Felicius no longer cared about the Ministry of Military Affairs' request to not leak the secret of the ballista unit. In addition, Felicius also sent fast horses to pursue the troops that escorted more than 500 Locrian captives to Thurii. He hoped that these captives could be exchanged for the Dionia soldiers held captive in Syracuse. This defeat made him more cautious. He also sent an urgent letter to the Thurii Senate. He was worried that Syracuse would bypass Crotone and attack Crimea instead. He hoped that the Senate would send a new legion to Crimea. The 3 cities, Asprostum, Cremissa, and Crotone, would be able to support each other. Their defenses would be thicker, more layered, and safer. The Trine soldiers led by Cypros did not follow the Dionia into Asprostum. Instead, they entered Ciudad Crotone. This was because Asprostum was small and could not accommodate so many people for a long time. Moreover, the addition of the Trine soldiers would also strengthen Crotone's defense. Crotone was overjoyed and did not care about the rations consumed by the Trine soldiers. After all, the armies of Crotone and Trillis were in the same boat in this battle. They were positioned on the 2 flanks of the Allied army and were the direct targets of the enemy's reinforcements. Under the joint pursuit of the Campanian mercenaries and Syracuse sailors, less than 4,000 Trine soldiers managed to escape. On the other hand, the Crotone soldiers were attacked by the reinforcements of Syracuse and the continuous pursuit of the mercenaries. After the Namibian and Celtic cavalry were intercepted by the 1st Brigade of the 5th Legion, in order to vent their anger and atone for their mistakes, A portion of the cavalry stalled the Daionia soldiers while waiting for the infantry to come and surround them, while the other portion turned northeast to pursue the Silitinian and Crotone soldiers. In the end, only about 8,000 people managed to reach the city. Both sides had lost more than half of their citizens. Cypros was grieving, but he was also secretly glad that he had made the right decision in advance. He had allowed the Trine citizens to evacuate to the Bruttii region of Daionia. He no longer needed to worry about their safety. The Crotone citizens, who had experienced a terrible defeat a few years ago, were once again plunged into great grief. Apart from grief, they were more worried about whether the Syracuse army would be able to withstand the attack of this huge army when they set foot on Crotone's land. The Crotone army, Trine soldiers, and less than 2,000 Silitinians made a total of about 14,000 people. Coupled with the emergency mobilization of free citizens by the council, it was estimated that there would be 20,000 people defending the city. Therefore, the generals of Crotone had some confidence. In the emergency, enlarged council of 1,000, someone raised the question: now that Crotone had suffered heavy losses, should they consider a truce with Syracuse, just like the truce with Daionia, in order to recover their strength? This proposal was opposed by most people. Even Lysias, who had always been used to going with the flow, refuted it sternly. He said loudly, "Everyone, Syracuse is different from Daionia. The tyrant Dionysius, with such a great advantage, will never sign a relatively equal truce with us. He will definitely want our great Crotone to become his slaves. He will make us pay a high tribute, let our citizens fight for him, and even change our democracy to a dictatorship like Syracuse's, just like what he did in Sicily and the other Greek city-states. Furthermore, after Crotone becomes the so-called alliance city-state of Syracuse, we will still have to face the bullying of our nemesis, Rockley. This is because Dionysius married the sister of Rockley's chief general, Demodorus. Rockley is the accomplice of Syracuse's invasion of Greece. In the eyes of Dionysius, Rockley's position is naturally much higher than Crotone's. This way, Rockley can use Dionysius's power to humiliate us, and even fabricate the benefits of Crotone. Citizens, faced with such a possible future, are you willing to submit to Syracuse? Fight Syracuse to the death. Even if Crotone perishes, we don't want to become Dionysius's slave." The citizens shouted angrily, finally coming to an agreement on the issue of war and peace. At this time, the messenger sent by Felicius arrived at Ciudad Crotone. Not only did he bring the ballista troops, but he also brought the promise that Felicius made on behalf of Daonia's senate. Daionia will fight alongside Crotone against Syracuse. If Crotone has any difficulties, they can bring it up to Daionia. Daionia will do its best to help. Daonia's promise and actions, bringing the ballista troops, moved the citizens of Crotone, greatly reducing the wariness that Crotone had always had against Daionia. For the first time, the citizens of Crotone felt a sense of security when they were backed by a powerful alliance. Felicius' messenger galloped along the main road without stopping. After changing horses 3 times at the relay station, it only took him half a day to bring the important battle report of the alliance's defeat to Turiai's senate. The news quickly spread throughout the city. Although the citizens of Turiai were not as sorrowful as the citizens of Daionia in Aspustum and Cremissa, most of the soldiers of the 4th and 5th legions who participated in the battle came from Bruttii, Aspustum and Cremissa. However, the citizens were far more shocked than the people from these 3 regions. Ever since the new city of Turiai was built, every time there was a war, they would receive news of victory. Having gotten used to victory, this was the first time they heard of defeat. Panic spread among the citizens on that day. Many citizens went to the Temple of Hades to pray, hoping that Pluto would protect the alliance. In the afternoon, even the citizens of Amendola and Abyssinia rushed to the temple while the Senate was holding an emergency meeting to discuss countermeasures. In the residence of the Devers, Kristoya was discussing the possible impact of the Alliance's defeat on her businesses with several business executives. Madam, Syracuse will soon march towards Crotone, and Espustum will also be the battlefield to ensure the safety of the bank. To ensure the safety of the bank, should we withdraw the gold and silver stored in Espustum Bank temporarily? The bank executive suggested carefully. The Bank of Espustum must not be evacuated. Kristoya said firmly, you must understand that in the eyes of the people, Kristoya Bank is not my personal property. It represents my husband, the Archon of Devers. In this critical situation, even the Archon's property has to be evacuated. How can the citizens of Espustum still have the confidence to hold on? Yes, not only can the bank not be evacuated, but it must also be open on time every day. Also, you must ask the employees of the bank in the city to face every customer with a confident smile. If Espustum's financial situation is tight and needs money, you must lend it to them even if there is no interest. The bank executive was stunned when he heard the last sentence, then said helplessly, Madam, I understand. How is the situation in the restaurant? Kristoya turned to another executive. Chapter 440. However, the restaurant is currently facing a problem. There is a shortage of wheat, flour, and fish, and we are unable to provide the food that the customers want. This has led to many complaints. The restaurant manager explained the situation. Sigh, there is nothing we can do about it. Because of the war, the entire Alliance's grain and fish supply is very tight. We are not the only ones who are sad. Kristoya sighed and said seriously, I suggest that we put a notice on the door of every restaurant to explain the reason to the customers and express our apologies. At the same time, we suggest that the customers order more beef and mutton, such as boiled beef and mutton, fried beef, roasted lamb leg. Andrea wrote to me from the Gramentum that Lucania City has raised too many cows and sheep this year. If they are not consumed in large quantities, the cows and sheep will lose weight in winter, and if the weather is too cold, many of them will freeze to death. That will be a huge loss for the herdsmen, so we have to buy as many livestock as possible from Lucania City. Furthermore, considering that this is a difficult time, the entire Alliance's people are facing food shortages. If we make a high profit at this time, we will be resented by the people. Therefore, I have decided to lower the price of all the food and only make a small profit to pay the employees. Before the war ends, we have to work together with the people of Dionia to get through this difficult time together. Yes, madam. I will carry it out immediately. The restaurant manager's response was much more straightforward. Kristoya yawned. Asuna saw that her mistress was a little tired, so she immediately stepped forward to stop the meeting and let the managers go back first. Madam, you are about to give birth, so why are you still working so hard? You have to think about the child in your belly. Asuna grumbled as she supported her. Kristoya held her big round belly with both hands and said softly, with such a big thing happening in the Alliance, there will naturally be more things to do. I have to deal with them. In a few days, Andrea will come and temporarily take over these things for me, so I can safely give birth to the baby. Madam Andrea is coming? That's great. Asuna said happily. She helped Kristoya take a stroll in the backyard to get rid of the swelling in her legs caused by sitting for too long. Andrea also wants to bring her 2 children back to Turii. One of them is her ex-husband's son, so that Bagul's father can see his grandson properly and satisfy his longing. Kristoya sighed. Andrea had been married before, had a child, and married into a foreign leader's family. Andrea had put in a lot of effort to make Bagul's huge family accept her and get along well with them. Adoris and Little Crow will definitely be very happy. Asuna laughed. Is Agnes back? Kristoya asked, suddenly remembering. Not yet. Madam, I think it's because of the failure of the battle. Not only are there more people going to the Temple of Hades, but there are also more believers in the Temple of Hera. That's why Madam Agnes is still busy. Asuna guessed. Nonsense. Kristoya frowned and said anxiously, she's also pregnant. How can she not take care of her own body? Send someone to call her back. Tell her it's my order. Yes. Asuna knew that her mistress was a woman of her word, so she hurriedly went to call the other maids. At this time, the backyard door was pushed open. Mother, I'm back. Cynthia carried a satchel filled with school supplies and took the initiative to rush forward and support Kristoya. Where's Adoris? He's playing football with his classmates in the school square. I hope he won't return home when it's dark like yesterday. He won't. I already warned him. Cynthia comforted Kristoya, then asked with concern, Mother, is there any news from Father? This afternoon, everyone heard the news of our defeat in Zilliton. They're not in the mood to go to class. They're all asking me, when will Father lead the army back? Kristoya turned to look at her adopted daughter, who was almost as tall as her shoulder. She thought of how wary she was of the Devers when they first met, but now she was proud of him. She couldn't help but feel gratified. Don't worry, your father will return victorious soon. Yes. Cynthia nodded vigorously. Mother, I'm back. A child's clear voice came from outside the door. This little rascal is back. Kristoya's face revealed a doting smile. During this period of time, because she was close to giving birth, Kristoya could no longer accompany the energetic little Klaus. She could only let the maids take him to the square to play every day. Mother, I'll go accompany brother. Cynthia sensibly walked forward. The maid who came in after her shouted excitedly, Madam, good news! Good news! Messengers from Lucania returned, saying that the master had won a great victory in that place called Poseidonia. He said, he eliminated more than 20,000 enemies. That's great. Kristoya couldn't help but shout. The Devers had been leading the army for so long, how could she not be worried? But as the mistress, she usually had to pretend to be calm, but this time she was really relieved. As soon as she shouted this sentence and relaxed, she felt a warm current between her legs, and her abdomen began to swell with pain. She, who had experience with childbirth, immediately steadied herself and used her hands to support herself on the stone table. She tried to use a calm tone and said, Asuna, Asuna, I'm going to give birth. Go inform Hoppus. Just as the Devers mansion was in a panic because of Kristoya's birth, the news of the Archon leading the army to victory over the Samonis in Lucania was like a warm wind that calmed the Turkestan people who were beginning to panic. Among the people worshipping at the Temple of Hades, someone publicly shouted the slogan, Let the Devers be king, for the first time. But at dusk, the messenger from the south once again broke the people's gradually calming mood. The shocking news of Syracuse's army breaking into Xyleting, not only ransacking the city, but also turning all the people into slaves, shocked the Turkestan people again, and also shocked the Senate, causing the originally hesitant senators to quickly make a decision. They agreed to Felicia's proposal to send the newly built Legio VI to Cremissa to protect the safety of Dionia. That night, while the Turkestan people were tossing and turning, unable to sleep, a newborn baby was born in the Devers mansion. Madam, it's a healthy and lovely girl. Asuna carried the newborn baby, whose body had already been wiped clean, the umbilical cord tied, and was wrapped in a clean linen cloth. She carefully walked to the bedside and showed it to Kristoya. Kristoya, who was already exhausted to the point of no strength, turned her head with difficulty and looked at her daughter, who was clawing her hands and crying loudly. A kind smile appeared on her face, which was covered in sweat. Eunice. Her name is Eunice. Kristoya remembered the agreement she had with the Devers. The people who had been anxiously waiting outside the bedroom all this time heard the good news of mother and daughter are safe, and they all let out a sigh of relief. In this era, giving birth to a child was a big matter, but it was also a difficult matter. Difficult childbirth was a common occurrence during childbirth. Even though the Devers had told the doctors like Hoppus about the precautions he had heard about in his previous life, and had also suggested that the experienced midwives of Dionia be gathered together, and through professional training, they would become doctors in charge of delivering babies in the hospital, the implementation of these measures allowed the death rate of newborns in Dionia to be controlled to a certain extent, but the death rate was still not low. "Little Klaus, you have a younger sister." Agnes gently stroked little Klaus' head and said softly, "Younger sister? Can I play with her often?" Little Klaus happily asked. "Not now, you can wait until she's older," Agnes explained to him while holding her slightly bulging belly. She sincerely hoped that in a few months, she would be able to smoothly give birth to a child. "That's great, it's a younger sister," Adoris also happily shouted. Little Klaus had been pestering him to play with him every day, and he didn't want to have another younger brother. That would be annoying to death. Cynthia was also very happy. She could finally have a little follower like the other female student. Eunice was welcomed by the whole family from the moment she was born. The next day, when the Turkestan Senate was gathering the newly built Legio 6 soldiers in Victory Square, preparing to send them south to defend Crimea, Syracuse's emissary, Damocles, walked into Carunia with his head held high. Damocles brought with him Dionysius' ultimatum to Carunia: surrender immediately, or else Xylite will be its example. All along, Carunia had been the front line of Crotone's resistance against Locriel. Its people were full of confidence in defending the city, and that was mainly because it had the full support of Crotone and other allied states behind it. However, this time they had lost the battle. Dionia and Crotone had been defeated, and Xylite and Trine had been captured. The forces supporting them had all but disappeared. Now, Carunia was deeply besieged. Moreover, they had long heard that Syracuse's siege capabilities were very strong, and that they had once captured Carthage's strategic town in Sicily, Mortia. The news that had just arrived shocked them even more. Xylite had fallen in half a day, Syracuse and Locriel's army had tightly sealed Carunia, so no one knew that the fall of Xylite was due to Dionysius' treachery. This caused the Carunians to lose confidence in defending the city, and at the same time, the tragic fate of the Xylite people also frightened them. The Carunians believed that even if Dionia and Crotone had a chance to counterattack in the future, Carunia would have already fallen by then. They themselves would have become slaves and sold to other places. Even if Carunia was recovered, it would have no meaning to them.